Gentlemen, start your engines. May the best woman win.
RuPaul's Drag Race is, and I do not say this lightly, one of the most challenging and entertaining competitive formats ever created. I'm not just talking about within the realm of reality competition shows either. There are very, very few competitions on Earth that require such a unique combination of charisma, uniqueness, nerve, and talent, and Drag Race requires a lot of it from all of its contestants. It's also just one of the best competitive formats ever constructed, owing in large part to the flexibility that drag as an art form enables, as well as its unapologetic willingness to do some goofy bullshit. And historically, Drag Race has sat in this perfect sweet spot of a competition that simultaneously focused on a very specialized skill, while also being pretty accessible and entertaining to the masses. In large part because, while drag as an art form is a very specialized and complex skill, it is also a skill that's pretty easy to break down into its constituent parts, all of which are basically just different flavors of entertainment skills like acting, writing, singing, dancing, performing stand-up, or whatever else. However, Drag Race is also a competition that has, in recent years, continued to butcher its own competitive format. This isn't really news to fans of the series. For a variety of reasons we'll get into in this video, Drag Race's approach to the concept of competition has changed over the years. And it's not hard to see it when you have a fandom so obsessed with crunching numbers and evaluating performances through the lens of track records, who are looking at how the show is cast, produced, and edited. And I think that, given how strong of a competitive format fundamentally Drag Race is, it's a perfect case study for analyzing how a competition can die a competitive death, how competitions, without proper care, lose their competitiveness, and the ramifications of a competition like this losing that competitive draw. This video is not going to be arguing that Drag Race has already died as a competition. What's the right way to put this? It's more like this video is exploring the death by 1,000 razor blades that a competition like Drag Race can experience as it slowly whittles away at its competitive integrity. It has definitely been hit by a few big razor blades, and it has dug some big gashes in it. But that's also true for any major competition on Earth that's lasted throughout years. They all go through changes in technology, skill, environment, and more that throw wrenches into the gears at one point or another. And it's absolutely not stuff that Drag Race can't recover from. Provided, of course, that they're actually able to start acknowledging it. That being said, before we can truly get into it, we do have some caveats to address, and before we can get into those, I need to let you know that we've got a new merch pre-order going on. If you've ever wanted to make sure I violently face consequences for my takes, or just want an absolutely adorable keychain, pre-orders for the Shaker keychain will be open until the end of July, so make sure to get on that ASAP. They're by the same artist who made the Wiggler pins earlier, and there's still some of those available for anyone who felt like they missed out on them on the first go round, so be sure to check out the link in the description to get one of your own. Part 0. The caveats. Now, every time I've tried to write this video previously, and I have tried a good few times, it is very delayed, it's accidentally turned into this hours-long essay that goes way too into detail on each season of the show. That's not what I want this video to be, but given that you are watching a video that's probably at least 2 hours long, it is still what it kind of inevitably becomes. And so instead, I'm going to do it more like this. I'm going to pick specific aspects of the show to focus on in each section. The formats, the casting, the challenges, the production, the audience, the runways, and most importantly, how the show picks its winners, and look at how they've evolved over time, and where things go wrong. We simply do not have the time to go through the show season by season with a fine-tooth comb, especially because I want to talk about some international franchises, and if we include those, there are way too many seasons for any of us to talk about. Nor is it really particularly useful for us to do so. This video is about how competitive formats can be weakened over time, how competitions die competitive deaths. And while it's cool to look at how the show has evolved over the span of 2 decades, I'm not doing a retrospective on Drag Race. I am doing an analysis on competitions as like a holistic concept, using Drag Race as our case study because I think it is really, really good as a competition. This is actually kind of tricky though, because Drag Race is an infamously self-referential show. Explaining a modern season to somebody who's not familiar with the entire franchise is actually pretty hard because, in order for you to understand why a lot of judging decisions are made the way they are, you have to know that Valentina refused to take her mask off during her lip sync to Ariana Grande's Greedy in season 9 against Nina Bonina Brown because she didn't know the words even though it's a 6-word chorus. Or that the queens of season 7 did such a bad job in the Shakespeare acting challenge that RuPaul's Coffee Enema kicked in and had her reading the girls for fucking filth. Or that Naomi Smalls is declaring that life's not fair in All Stars 4 after eliminating a frontrunner is the reason why the All Stars format keeps getting fucked up. Or that All Stars 1 in general really was a rough spot. Or that drag is not a contact sport because Mimi I'm First picked up and Fireman carried India Farah back onto the stage during a lip sync in season 3. Or that no, I promise, that is the way they're supposed to be pronouncing the word opulence. It's just that 8 years ago, Mercedes Amon Diamond accidentally mispronounced opulence. You own everything. as opulence, you earn everything, and RuPaul has been cackling about it on and off ever since. Or that Willem fucked her husband during filming and that's why she had to hashtag RuPaulologize on the live finale after being disqualified. Or that Vanessa Vanjie Mateo didn't know what her exit line would be when she was first out on season 10 because she just assumed she'd go further, so she just walked backwards saying her own name and RuPaul had an aneurysm over it. Or that Alyssa Edwards had her title as Miss Gay America revoked and handed to Coco Montrese as the runner-up, and that's why in season 6 she told Coco, "Girl, look how fucking orange you look," and that's why the producers conspired to have them lip-sync to Cold Hearted by Paula Abdul. Or that Nicole Paige Brooks complained during the season 2 reunion that she didn't come to the show expecting this sort of malicious gay faggotry. Or that Laganja Estranja told an old woman that Texas is dry, kind of like her vagina. Or that Tammy Brown told RuPaul that she doesn't see her walking the children in nature all the way back in season 1. Or that Alyssa Edwards and Tatiana served so hard to shut up and drive that they were both allowed to eliminate Fifi O'Hara on All Stars 2, because this show cannot stop kicking Fifi O'Hara while she's down. Or so many other things. Genuinely, these are all things that are being referenced on and off in modern Drag Race, not just in the fandom, but on the show, like in scripted acting challenges or in songs. And this just scratches the surface. Like, Manila Luzon dressed up as a pineapple once, like, 15 years ago now at this point, and they still talk about it. Hell, one time she didn't dress as a bloody menstrual pad for a Padded for the Gods runway because broadcasting regulations don't allow it or something, and they still talk about that. And that's without even getting into those international franchises I mentioned. Like, good lord, how do I explain to someone who watches All Stars 7 that Jimbo the Drag Clown actually was originally on Canada's Drag Race Season 1 where she screamed from the top of a fake mountain and then repeatedly got read for filth by a judge that everyone went insane on because it's, COVID times. Then she returned for UK versus the World where she threw baloney at RuPaul while dressed like a sleep paralysis demon, and RuPaul loved this so much that she basically constructed the entirety of All Stars 7 to give Jimbo a crown. I'm still not over what happened to Lemon in that one. Anyways, the answer is that we will try to avoid getting into the rabbit hole of it as much as possible. If you have never watched Drag Race before, I will do my best to make this as digestible and understandable as I can. But I fear that RuPaul thinks the only thing funnier than herself are the insane things that intoxicated, stressed-out homosexuals who took out a mortgage to be on the show have done in a desperate effort to win her attention over the last 20 years. So, whenever a reference is essential to understand, I'll try to explain it, and I will simply make them because I think they're funny. I am explaining the show for non-fans, but also for fans. I promise I am, in fact, a real fan. I have watched the show, Tamar. Whenever there is a reference, I will cite it on screen and try to show where it comes from so that anyone who wants to know where to find it will be able to, go and find it. And also so that non-fans don't think I'm having a stroke if I make a reference to the tragedy of Robbie Turner's Uber driver or the other Tyra threatening to send a pipe bomb to DragCon. God, this show's insane. Anyways, with that out of the way, let's get into it properly. Part 1. The formats. When it comes to Drag Race, there are a few different formats that have been used across a few different franchises. We're not going to get into the nuances of every single change because I have fallen down that trap before. Good God. And also just because it's not super helpful. Instead, we're going to break this down into the main formats that have been used, and we will specifically be breaking them down into the following: the first standard format, the second standard format, the third standard format, the All-Stars Teams format, the All-Stars Lip Sync for Your Legacy format, the All-Stars Rumocracy format, the All-Stars All Winners format, the All-Stars Charity format, the All-Stars Tournament Bracket format, the UK Standard format, the Canadian Standard format, the Canadian Golden Beaver format, and I think that's where it ends for this video. You're going to notice there's a lot of All-Stars formats here, and we will get to that in a second. This will probably be the longest section of the video. I hope, good God, I can't have them all be this long. But I promise it is actually necessary to understand how this competition works. And the rest will hopefully be much shorter. Can't promise they'll be much better, like a certain conservative British queen, but I will do my best. To start with, we'll get some things out of the way that are part of basically every format used by the show in some capacity. After entering the workroom at the start of every episode, the queens will sometimes compete in a low-stakes mini-challenge where they can win small prizes and sometimes an advantage or some sort of special role in the upcoming main challenge, which is called the Maxi Challenge. Sometimes there is no mini-challenge, it's just, we skip straight to the Maxi depending on the challenge, but we'll get more into those later. After the Maxi Challenge, the queens will typically present a look on the runway based on some sort of predetermined theme. Again, we'll get to that. Followed by judges' critiques. The goal of this season is to win the title of the next drag superstar of your country for a standard season or to win some sort of equivalent title in an all-stars season. Winning the title comes with a crown and scepter plus some sort of makeup-related prize like a year's worth of Anastasia Beverly Hills cosmetics plus a cash prize ranging from $20,000 US on the low end, or I guess technically it's £0 on the low end because of BBC rules and RuPaul being cheap, but whatever. It's $200,000 on the high end. Everything past this point in this description of how this show works is kind of just subject to change, and sometimes the first part of this can change a bit too. For example, some seasons with larger casts will split them in half and do a split premiere, where instead of everyone competing against each other, they'll only compete against their half. Again, These formats are very broad categories, and it doesn't mean that they are identical from season to season, just that they are broadly similar in the ways that matter for our purposes. And we'll get more into the specifics as we go, I promise and or threaten. As well, given how many spin-offs Drag Race has, I want to explain what I mean when I say the word standard as opposed to all-stars. There are franchises called all-stars franchises. Canada has one, and it's excellent, by the way. Spain has one. The US obviously has theirs. There's a global all-stars. Girl, that was really a rough spot. As was that sentence. Jesus Christ. Anyways, I'm not just using all-stars to refer to those. A standard season of Drag Race is any season from any franchise where the cast is entirely or almost entirely made up of brand new contestants who have not competed before. There have been a couple exceptions to this. Sometimes a queen is allowed to return for a subsequent season if they were either eliminated very early but were a fan favorite or had to quit for medical reasons. But a standard season is usually just first-time competitors. All-Stars, for the purposes of this video, refers to any franchise where contestants are exclusively cast from the existing pool of Drag Race contestants from any past season or other franchise, with no non-Rue girls being allowed to compete. This includes the All-Stars franchises in each country that runs them, the Citations Royale, Global All-Stars, and the Versus the World franchises done in Canada, the UK, and Down Under. Now, with that established, for our purposes, this is what each of those formats mean, and which US, Canadian, or UK seasons they encompass, since those are the franchises I'm most familiar with. The first standard format is the standard format for the competition. Between 9 and 13 queens are selected via a combination of regular casting, public voting, and personal recruitment by producers to compete on the season. For judges' critiques, the judges will divide the queens based on performance into 3 tops and 3 bottoms, with any remaining queens being sent backstage for being safe. The judges will offer their critiques, then the tops and bottoms will be sent back to the back with the others while the judges deliberate. Once they're done, everyone's called back to the main stage and RuPaul will declare a winner, who gets a prize as well as immunity from being in the bottom in the next week for the first half of the season, as well as declaring the bottom 2 for the week who are up for elimination. In order to save themselves, the bottom 2 will do a lip sync for your life to a song they were given in advance. The queens are allowed to choose to approach the lip sync however they want, but they will be judged on their execution, including how well they know the words, embody the song, maintain their composure, maintain their outfit, and engage with their audience. The winner will be told "Shantae, you stay and remain in the competition," a reference to a RuPaul song, while the loser will be told to "sashay away," also a RuPaul reference. The loser will leave the stage, write a goodbye note and lip sync on the mirror starting in season 2, and then leave. Rinse and repeat until we get to the final 2 for the season, at which point they will do a lip sync to a RuPaul song that's honestly mostly kind of just ceremonial, and then RuPaul will declare one of them to be America's Next Drag Superstar. This is the format used for US seasons 1, 2, and 3, although each season also had some quirks, such as allowing queens to return from past seasons, allowing eliminated queens to return within the same season, non-elimination episodes where both queens in the bottom were allowed to stay, etc. I promise the breakdown of most formats will be a lot shorter going forward because most of them build off of this. The second standard format is largely the same as the first standard, but with a changed finale. Instead of a final 2, there is now a final 3. And while the first standard format involved announcing the winner during initial filming, Perez Hilton spoiled the winner of season 3, so now they do it differently. Starting with season 4, the show will pare down their cast to a final 3 by the end of filming, at which point the outcome will be left in limbo. Then, usually either right after or right before the final competitive episode airs, the show will film a live finale where, among other things, all 3 finalists will be filmed winning the season, but no official winner will be declared for another week or 2 until the finale itself airs, at which point Schrodinger's cat will be pulled out of the box and one of the endings will be aired, with that person being the true winner. This format was used from season 4 to season 8 of the US franchise, with seasons 4 and 5 also keeping the immunity mechanic from the first standard, while all subsequent seasons got rid of it as a result of Alyssa Edwards not serving Katy Perry realness and having to apologize for it on Twitter. I promise I'm not making that up, I think the show contractually made her do that. Seasons 7 and 8 also involved the finalists performing a lip sync to an original song written for them, which isn't really competitive, but it was more like a victory lap. You know, it wasn't going to change who was going to win the show, but it must be mentioned because Naomi Smalls was given Legs as her season 8 finale song, and gay people still reference that shit regularly. I am gay people. They tried to put her on the cover of Vogue, but her legs were too long. The third standard format is also largely the same as the first 2, but after some abysmal lip sync performances during season 9, the producers decided the queens must redeem themselves and that winners need to lip sync too. Because in case you haven't noticed, based on the competitive format so far, if you're really good, you might not end up in the bottom, meaning you might not lip sync. But the problem is, they also want their winners to be good lip syncers. And season 9 had some dog shit lip syncs. So as a result, instead of one of the finalists just being declared the winner, the finale is now a competitive episode. This can take a couple different formats. Either 1, a final 4 competing in a lip sync smackdown as was done for seasons 9 through 13, or 2, anywhere from a final 5 to a final 3, each performing a lip sync to an original song written for them, and then RuPaul picking a top 2 out of the finalists lip sync against each other for the crown, as has been done since season 14. Iconic original lip sync songs from this era include Willow Pill's I Hate People and Sasha Colby's Goddess. Of course. The UK standard format is pretty similar to the US standard formats, with the biggest differences being the prizes and the finale format. As far as prizes go, Drag Race UK airs on the BBC, which does have some rules about not allowing for sponsored prizes or cash prizes, which, if you've watched Drag Race, that's their prizes, meaning the queens basically just get the title, the crown, the scepter, and some repeater badges for their trouble. That changed in season 6 though, with the winner now getting 25,000 GBP. For the finale, they've actually been pretty consistent in their format. Either the final 3 or final 4 will be tasked with writing and recording a verse for either a RuPaul song or an original song, at which point the judges will whittle them down to a final 2, who will lip sync to a licensed song. They still do film both queens winning and don't reveal the winner until the episode airs, but it is still filmed way back when. Regardless, this has been pretty remarkably consistent across their entire series so far. Drag Race didn't go this long without some pretty big changes in the US. The Canadian standard format is kind of a misnomer because Canada's Drag Race is a ridiculous show that's always changing some bullshit up. But the reason why I say this is the standard format is that this is the pre-Golden Beaver format. That's the important thing. Also, to be very clear, this is the best Drag Race franchise in the English language. Argue with the wall. Competitively, it's one of the most interesting and fair, and it routinely has some of the most unique challenges because it's not held back by RuPaul thinking she's kind of low-key above it all. The show is hosted by Brooklyn Heights, runner-up of US Drag Race Season 11, and she is amazing as a host. These 3 seasons use basically the same format as the UK standard format, with the main difference being in Season 2 when they made the top 4 do a lip-sync SmackDown tournament to eliminate one more queen before the finale. And also, I guess that the winners of Canada's Drag Race have always gotten 100,000 Canadian dollars instead of just some stupid fucking badges. The All-Stars teams format was a mistake and everyone acknowledges it. Due to getting only 6 episodes to work through 12 queens, they paired everyone up into teams and had them compete that way. It was only used for this one season, which aired after season 4 of the main US series, and it went so badly that the All-Stars franchise was put on pause for 4 years. It's not worth getting into just because it's never coming back and basically nothing from it was ever used or liked again except for a bunch of the queens. And also the fights. There were some good fights in that season. The All-Stars Lip Sync for Your Legacy format is the single most important change to the format ever made in terms of how far it deviates from the past and affects the future. It reverses the elimination process from the standard formats. After dividing queens into tops and bottoms and sending the safe queens backstage, the judges will do their critiques and then RuPaul will announce who the top 2 are, as well as who will be put up for elimination right away. Then they're sent backstage, at which point the queens who are up for elimination will plead their case with the top 2. Once that's done, the top 2 will each decide on which of the bottom queens they want to eliminate by selecting a lipstick with their name on it, and then that top 2 will lip sync for your legacy, with the winner earning $10,000 and the power to eliminate whichever queen's lipstick they picked. Starting after Bibi Zahara Benet refuses to wear a lipstick, which definitely had Trixie Mattel's name on it, out of respect for Ben de la Creme on All Stars 3, production has required every queen who lost the lip sync to still reveal who they would have eliminated. This format also typically has some mechanism for an eliminated queen to return to the competition midway through, either via a challenge like All Stars 2 and 3, or through a lip sync SmackDown tournament like All Stars 4. Structurally, the rest of the season is otherwise relatively normal, and this is the format used for All Stars 2 through All Stars 4, plus spin-offs like certain seasons of UK vs. the World and Canada vs. the World. All Stars B also featured a twist where, the top 4, the eliminated queens would vote to decide who would advance to the top 2. This was, pretty obviously just done to give production a way to safely eliminate Bibi Zahara Benet without tarnishing her and the show's legacy as their first winner, but oops, accidentally resulted in the elimination of frontrunner Shangela because it turns out that format that made Shangela eliminate half the queens because she was in the top a lot was not one well suited to that cast voting for her to advance the finale. Whoops. But also, Shangela's a bad person, so it turns out, everyone was okay, except for Thorgy, who, she tried. God bless her. All Stars 4 also did something weird, and by weird I mean really fucking stupid, by crowning both of their finalists as co-winners. Nobody liked that one, especially because, frankly, Naomi Smalls should have won it all, and if there was going to be a tie, it should have been her and Mo Hart. But I'm still confident that they blocked her from the top 2 as a punishment for breaking their format by eliminating Manila, but whatever. We'll get there. The All-Stars Roomocracy format follows a similar concept to the Lip Sync for Your Legacy format, except now only one contestant is declared the top All-Star of the week. Instead of 2 of them lip syncing against each other, the top All-Star will pick a queen to eliminate as before, and all the other queens will cast a vote for who they would want to eliminate out of the bottoms. Then, the top All-Stars will lip sync against a lip sync assassin, a contestant from a previous season who is known for their lip syncing ability, theory at least, and serves as the representative for the will of the other queens. If the top All-Star wins that lip sync, she gets the cash and eliminates whoever she picked. If the lip sync assassin wins the lip sync The cash rolls over to the next week and the queen who received the most votes gets eliminated. After the episode, the queens reveal the vote count, and if the top all-star lost the lip sync, they will also reveal who they would have eliminated. All-Stars 6 also featured a mechanic called the Redemption Lip Sync Smackdown, where the eliminated queens would lip sync against one another after each elimination for a chance to return to the competition. Very Survivor Redemption Island, and I wish it kept getting used because it was actually really fun. All-Stars 5 and 8, which also uses this format, did not have a mechanism for returning to the competition, although All-Stars 8 did have a side competition called the Queen of the Fame Games. For this gimmick, and gimmick is the right word for this bullshit, after a queen was eliminated, their runway for that week's theme would still be shown at the end of Untucked. And then in the penultimate episode, they all came back for a talent show challenge, which granted the winners a score multiplier in the Fame Games. After that episode aired, fans had 3 days to vote for their favorite queen, and the queen with the most votes got $50,000. But, obviously the queen who got a score multiplier won that, because, duh. There's a reason this gimmick has never returned, and it's, only maybe 50% because people didn't really care for the outcome, and more just because it was a stupid season, but we don't have time for that right now. The All-Stars All Winners format was a one-off format, at least so far, used specifically because it was basically the only way to get a large number of past winners to return. Prior to this, the only winner who returned to All-Stars was Bibi Zahara Benet in All-Stars 3, and that was a mistake for a lot of complicated reasons that have less to do with Bibi than the structure of the show in general, but that's for later. Winners don't want to tarnish their legacies by coming back and losing. Who wants to be the first winner to go home first? So, instead, they were promised a very flattering season with no eliminations. Instead, the way it's going to work is that queens are competing for legendary legend stars. Each week, the top 2 are given 1 legendary legend star each, and then compete in a lip sync for your legacy. For the final challenge, the reward became 3 stars, because, of course, some bullshit. The winner of the lip sync each week is given the power of the Platinum Plunger, which is very clearly gold, and I don't know why they called it platinum, but whatever. This power can be used against any of the non-tops of the week, and whoever it's used against will be blocked from receiving any legendary legend stars in the next episode should they win the challenge. This power was used 9 times throughout the season and only effectively used 3. The 4 queens with the fewest stars would compete in a lip sync bracket for the title of She Already Done Had Herses and a cash prize of $50,000, and the top 4 would do the same to compete for the title of Queen of All Queens and a $200,000 tip. This format has not been used since, although some version of it will probably be used if they ever do all winners again, although who knows if they'll do all winners again because everyone got real pissy about that one, including the winners. No one was happy about it. Anyways, moving along. The All-Stars charity format was a response to how badly production fucked up All-Stars 8. And All-Stars 8, for the unfamiliar, became notorious for some very blatant production favoritism, and also for the queens who realized they weren't being favored, either attempting to quit or actually quitting. This format was also a non-elimination format like All Winners, where queens were competing for beautiful benefactress badges, and could use the ruby snippers to block each other from placing in the top. However, a big difference here is that the season was for charity. The queens themselves didn't win anything. To compensate, they were each paid $50,000 plus were given a $25,000 budget to pay for their outfits, which, for people who are not fans of the show or are not familiar with it, is actually not only a pretty typical budget for a Drag Race season, especially All-Stars. Actually, frankly, it's kind of on the low end, but also is not something the show normally provides. We will be getting into that later, though, I promise. Anyways, each queen picked a charity at the start of the season, and every prize they won went towards their charity, with the winning queen's charity getting $200,000. It's a neat idea, but as much as non-elimination formats appeal to queens who don't want to spend 5 figures on a runway package and then get sent home in the first episode, again, see the All-Stars 8 gimmick, it kind of just flopped. The All-Stars tournament bracket format is the current format for All-Stars in the US. For this one, 18 queens return and are split into 3 brackets of 6 queens each, orange, pink, and purple bracket. Each bracket will get 3 competitive non-elimination episodes, with the top 2 queens getting 2 most valuable queen or MVQ points for being in the top, as well as being given a chance to lip sync for your legacy to earn a 3rd bonus point. Afterwards, the remaining queens will each be given 1 point to hand out to one of the other 5. After 3 rounds, the top 3 from each bracket for All-Stars 10 and the top 2 for All-Stars 11, unless they're in the purple bracket because they got 3, will advance to the merge, where they will compete for a couple of regular elimination episodes in the standard format for some reason before the finale, which is formatted as the Tournament of All-Stars SmackDown for the Crown. Basically just a lip sync SmackDown, except they'll also bring back the wildcard queen for All-Stars 10 to compete in this. Who knows really why they wait that long in that season. In All-Stars 11, they brought back the contestant in the beginning of the merge, which was objectively the much better decision, and also, an important step for representation, because they did allow the first gay person ever to come back. Like the last few formats we've discussed, this one exists purely to make returning more appealing for queens. Instead of having to prep and pay for a full season right out the gate, they only need to pay for looks for the first 3 episodes at the start. After their bracket finishes, they go home and the finalists will get to prepare for the merge, while nobody else has to waste their money on all these outfits they're not going to get to show. Again, in theory, not a terrible idea, but in practice, some queens are waiting until episode 7 to actually appear on television only to get eliminated in episode 9. And some queens win their bracket in episode 3 and then just have to sit in the back burner until episode 10. And because of the limited competitive formats and the way the points are handled, it's just not really a super exciting competition within the brackets themselves. My firm opinion has always been that they need to understand Mario Kart rules where first place gets a lot of points, but everyone else also gets some. It's just more fun that way, but whatever. And of course, I've saved the best for last with the Canadian Golden Beaver format, which is the best standard format for a Drag Race franchise, argue with the goddamn wall. It is the only one that's ever been transferred directly to an All-Stars format, and it is the only one that should be used for any season of the show, standard or All-Stars, going forward, for reasons that basically every other section of this video will argue in favor of, either explicitly or implicitly. In this format, queens compete as usual in the standard format, but instead of selecting the tops and bottoms and sending the safe queens to the back like normal, the judges will declare the winner of the Maxi Challenge on stage, as well as the bottom 3, similar to like the Roomocracy format. The winner is then given the power of the Golden Beaver, which saves one of the bottoms from having to lip sync, and, in the process, forces the other 2 bottoms to lip sync for their life. After Untucked, the winner will announce who she's giving the Golden Beaver to, then the winner and the recipient will head back to the back, and then the lip sync will proceed as normal. This format is, as mentioned, used for at least 2 All-Stars seasons, Canada vs. the World Season 2 and UK vs. the World Season 3, where it's called the Chippy Tea instead. It was also used for the Slajam Royale as the Golden Balut, and in Canada's All-Stars, the format is still used but slightly modified. Instead of the winner giving the Golden Beaver, all queens who aren't up for elimination that week will vote for who receives it, again kind of similar to Roomocracy. Now, in spite of the fact that this is a very long section already, and I feel like it will sound a bit absurd for me to say this, there are a lot of variations in all of this that I'm not accounting for in terms of little tweaks to the structure or whatever, but hopefully by this point you understand the big picture, how the show's formats have evolved. You'll notice that the standard formats actually changed very little over the years, and outside of the finale, the only real change to the standard format across Canada, the UK, and the US in nearly 20 years was the introduction of the Golden Beaver in Canada. This is in large part because of what I said at the top. The format for Drag Race is one of the best competitive structures ever created, and the standard seasons really have no reason to try and fix what ain't broke. Tons of queens are still willing to compete on those seasons, even if it's sometimes a bit of a raw deal and always a gamble. And fans really love it, so the format just doesn't really need to change much. And that is a good thing. You know, the Golden Beaver is the only gimmick they've come up with in 2 decades across dozens and dozens of seasons that could actually make the standard format better by introducing a bit more strategy and a bit more autonomy within the competition without fundamentally undermining the nature of it. There are some things they've tried that are kind of a similar one-off gimmick. There was one season, for example, where each queen was given a chocolate bar and wrote their name on it and then would have to reveal who got the golden ticket after they got eliminated. You'd unwrap your chocolate, and if it, was chocolate, well, it's chocolate. You go home. But if there's a golden ticket, you get to stay. Nobody liked that because it meant that there was like a stretch of 4 episodes in a row where no one went home because of various gimmicks colliding with each other. They've generally tried to reduce those in recent standard seasons. And there's a reason for that, because, see, part of what makes Drag Race's format work so well is that it's what I'd call a contestant versus show progression format, in the sense that fundamentally a contestant's progression is dictated by how the show subjectively, sometimes arbitrarily, see the tangent about the makeover challenge from later, evaluate the performances of the contestant. In all standard formats, the contestants cannot really directly affect the progression of another queen in the competition. They are all obstacles in each other's way, but one queen can't choose to eliminate another one herself. She has to convince the judges to do it for her. This is in contrast to a show like American Idol, which I would argue is contestant versus audience, or a show like Survivor, which is contestant versus contestant. In American Idol, contestant progress was influenced pretty heavily by the judges, but the final decision on who proceeded was the audience vote, meaning that's who they were trying to compete towards. In Survivor, the show itself is largely just a neutral platform on which a competition is being held. Jeff Probst has basically no subjective control over who wins versus loses a challenge, who gets what prizes or what rewards or what penalties, who goes home, and ultimately who wins. All of that is dictated by the objectively measured performances of contestants in challenges with largely binary win-loss states, combined with the individually made decisions of all other contestants via choices in who to reward, punish, and or vote against. Even the winner is determined on set at the time of filming, even if it's not revealed until months and months later. And that decision is made by the contestants based off of what they knew at the time of filming, not what they knew from, watching it months and months later. You'll notice, however, that All-Stars seasons don't work like that really at all. All-Stars, at every turn, is trying to find a way to adapt this contestant versus show format into a contestant versus contestant format. Why, though? I mean, there's a couple of reasons for that. First and foremost, it adds more drama if they're eliminating each other. At least in theory. In practice, for reasons we'll get to in what I think is going to be part 4, this doesn't happen. The other main reason, also related to what I think will be part 4, but again, the order of this might get mixed up, is that the show doesn't actually want to be the villain. It's one thing in the main series, because that's a little bit of a different story. But by the time someone comes back for All-Stars, they're usually a pretty well-established fan favorite. That's why they get brought back. And people get really upset and angry when they get sent home. And the queens are oftentimes a bit bitter with the show about it too. That's not a problem when it's the main series and you're sending home Serena Chacha, who has no room to complain. But when you have a cast like All-Stars 2, where every single queen was a top-tier performer who could have won their original season, you can pretty easily alienate a lot of queens with formats that either screw them over or make them look bad. Because again, if they come back and it damages their reputation, that's a scary precedent to set for any other queen who might come back. Like, I think the reason why there hasn't really been another Fifi O'Hara in terms of how production has treated a queen on their show, especially on All-Stars, is because that makes a lot of people not want to compete. I'm a pretty firm believer that the All-Stars Lip Sync for Your Legacy format was invented pretty much entirely just because Drag Race wanted to be able to invite back these fan favorites without getting yelled at for eliminating them. And it mostly kind of worked. The problem is that queens don't want to be responsible for eliminating each other either. This is their livelihood, and cutting down a queen's second chance feels awful. What's more, it's not like fan ire just disappears, it's just redirected. Instead of yelling at the show, people are yelling at the queens. Alaska got ripped to shreds week after week for not sending Roxy home, even though she probably should have been. And queens were scared to eliminate fan favorites because they knew it would generate a huge backlash that would get very personal and also severely impact their careers if it played out poorly. What's more, unlike the main series, the All-Star seasons have a relatively small pool of contestants to pick from, which gives the contestants way more leverage. That's the biggest reason why the All-Stars All-Winners format is also the most favorable to the queens, because if you're casting exclusively from winners, there's a real small pool of them. There's only a few dozen worldwide. But even then, the queens kind of weren't a fan of it. Or at least they weren't very happy with it, and, as shown by the fact that they tried to film their own reunion to bitch about it, and then realized they were going to get in too much trouble, so they shelved it. Finding the balance between a format that is still competitive and fair, but also doesn't get anyone yelled at too much, has been a permanent challenge for the show across its formats. And that's why I really like the Golden Beaver format so much. It threads that needle. It adds drama and strategy and a contestant versus contestant dynamic, or at least an element, that doesn't get in the way of what makes the show great. Namely, fundamentally, the lip sync for your life, which is genuinely the best competitive mechanic to ever exist in a reality competition show. Eat shit, top model, and Tyra, you absolute sociopath. The legacy ones almost never hit the same though, because the queens just don't have that drive to stay in the game. Like, if you're lip syncing for your legacy, you already won. You're safe. You're good. You will be here next week, probably. This is mostly just for fun at this point. Any system involving points doesn't have enough runway or twists or turns to make it fun to watch, and it just kills the competition early. Like, there were queens even on the all-winners season who kind of gave up halfway through because they realized they probably wouldn't have enough stars to make it through to the end. Only the Golden Beaver works. Everyone should be using the Golden Beaver. And also, they are not allowed to change the name, you fucking cowards. You got it from Canada, we get to name it the same way Rusicles are all still Rusicles, even in the Canadian franchise that she doesn't participate in basically at all. Just like the Canada arm, we get this shit. Anyways, this has been way too much about the formats. We're like probably half an hour into this. Sorry, I have my recording software is on my other screen, so that's why I keep looking over there to check on it. But we need to get on to the other sections. Before we do though, I want to say I do promise this was necessary because nothing else is going to make sense in terms of my critiques of this show as a competition if you don't have the formats figured out. And if you already knew about the formats, I'm so sorry. I hope that you enjoyed this and or skipped to part 2. And speaking of...
Everyone can be someone.
Part 2. The casting. Drag Race casting is a bit of a unique process, but in general, there are 3 basic ways that someone can end up on a season of Drag Race. The first is just by auditioning normally. You film an audition reel, you submit it, and see if you get picked. This is how 99% of queens on standard seasons get cast. The second is a process of public voting. This was done through the Facebook fan vote for seasons 1, 2, 5, and 6, where any queen could submit a video begging for votes, and the queen with the most who wasn't already going to be on the season would be added to it. It was also done for All Stars 1 between all past contestants, although the winner of that vote, season 4 winner Sharon Needles, declined the invite, so it went to Pandora Box in second place. Of the 12 queens who competed, they were all in the top 24 out of all 46 past contestants, with Shangela being the only one in the top 10 not to seemingly get an invite. Meanwhile, Mimi I'm First was number 3rd in the voting. I could not believe it, given that of the shit I've seen, she didn't have that many fans. Anyways, the third option for casting was direct recruiting. This is how all queens for All Stars seasons are cast now, but also occasionally how certain queens for the standard seasons are cast too. Usually it's not explicitly like, do you want a spot on the show? More like, we really want you to audition for this season, or like they'll give a queen a call and be like, so are you going to audition again this year? Which is sort of them saying like, if you audition, we'll have a spot for you. When it comes to casting, Drag Race is kind of in a unique position given that it's a skill-based competition that can theoretically include basically any sort of performance skill that someone can do in a wig and heels. Contestants on Drag Race have, at various times, played the violin, the guitar, the harpsichord, and the flute, among other instruments, as well as painted pictures, done burlesque, presented traditional dances from various cultures, done stand-up, jumped from about 4 feet up in the air and landed straight on their back, juggled knives, jumped rope with their own hair, demonstrated martial arts moves, performed original songs, and pretended to kill themselves with a toaster in a bathtub full of spaghetti as an interpretive dance about lockdowns during COVID. And that is all just within the context of the Talent Show Challenge. There are queens who prioritize singing, dancing, lip-syncing, fashion, makeup, comedy, acting, and basically any other type of entertainment you can imagine. As a result, when casting a season of Drag Race, production is also inherently deciding what kind of season it is going to be. Season 3, for example, was cast to be a fashion-heavy season, especially with the recruitment of Raja by RuPaul herself. Season 7 was also supposed to be kind of a fashion season, but or at least I think that's what the plan was. They overshot, cast too many people who looked pretty but couldn't really act or lip sync, and ended up with a young versus old season instead. What's more, Drag Race standard seasons can't cast the best of the best for each season. It is supposed to be a reality competition show, which means it has to be an entertainment product, and that means you need some fodder to eliminate in the first half of the season. Otherwise, the really special talented queens who are already successful in their actual everyday lives and careers aren't going to bother auditioning, because they don't want to go home first. They want some wiggle room there, and you are going to end up wasting your superstars for no reason. A lot of queens get cast just to fill out the roster and give the queens who actually have a shot at winning some time to build their narrative, with the competition truly kicking into high gear after the Snatch game, but we'll get there in the next section. This is why most standard seasons will come with like 2 to 4 much more experienced or like kind of clearly more talented queens who are expected to do very well, about half a dozen queens who transparently aren't expected to win and can be eliminated basically whenever is most convenient for production, and then a small handful of queens who are basically wild cards. Queens with outside the box fashion or makeup or aesthetics or vibes or whatever else as a way to sort of test the waters, see what the fans actually do or don't respond to. That's how you get some of the queens who have some especially weird makeup or a unique aesthetic approach to drag. Drag Race also sometimes uses these sorts of wildcard slots to do kind of a backdoor pitch for their other shows, like how both Nikki Doll and Brooklyn Heights were likely originally cast as a pseudo-audition to host their own versions of the show in France and Canada respectively. This is one of the inherent problems of a competition like Drag Race, but also not one that can't be overcome. In fact, in a lot of early seasons, this was what made it better. It's not like queens don't know who the likely frontrunners are and who's likely not expected to do super well, but they could still overcome it. A famous example of this being Naomi Smalls in Season 8. Naomi was, and still is, a fashion girly, and also one of my all-time favorite queens, who was very young, pretty inexperienced, and didn't have the same money and access that some of the more established queens did. In particular, for our purposes, she was up against a trio of really, really talented and well-established New York City queens on her season in the form of Bob the Drag Queen, Acid Betty, and Thorgy Thor. After the Snatch Game Challenge, again, we'll get to that, Naomi was put in the bottom with Acid Betty for causing a commotion by Madonna. The immediate assumption that I think most people watching had was that Acid Betty was about to beat Naomi's skinny little ass and send her packing. But Naomi surprised everyone and absolutely dog-walked Acid across the stage for the entire performance, saving herself and sending a frontrunner home. Naomi went on to be a finalist on that season and a finalist on All Stars 4 as well, cementing herself in both seasons as a very real threat across pretty much all fields on top of being very pretty. She wasn't cast to be a frontrunner, at least I don't think she was, and after how Season 7 went, I think they kind of cast her assuming she'd probably be fodder. But then she was given that chance to prove them wrong and seized it. This sort of moment is what makes Drag Race electrifying and exemplifies the importance of Drag Race's casting approach in terms of allowing a queen to prove she's more than they expected, allowing the competition to play out as a competition. That being said, casting is also very deliberately trying to make a point with each season's cast, and that often means that the narrative of the season is mostly set in advance. A lot of the show's winners are functionally chosen during the casting process. Raja, Bianca, Bob the Drag Queen, and Sasha Colby are all pretty good examples of that, I think, or at least relatively uncontroversial ones. But that doesn't mean those wins aren't earned. Like, it can't really be helped that any standard season that Sasha Colby was on was going to be a season that she was going to win because she's just that good at drag. Sucks to suck for everyone else. But she still had to fight to get there against some very talented opponents. And there have been seasons where queens who were clearly picked to go far, if not win it all, fucked it up for themselves along the way. On the less serious end, there's Valentina fucking up and ending up in the bottom and not bothering to learn the words to Greedy. And on the more serious end, or most serious end really, there's Sherry Pie being outed as a predator after filming Wrapped, and so she basically got fully edited out of the show even though she made it to the finale and was pretty much certainly supposed to be the winner. Like, I feel like that's a pretty common consensus from at least the queens who are on the season. However, there's also All-Stars, and this is where casting is a lot trickier for 3 big reasons. First off, the casting pool is a lot smaller. It can only pull from previous contestants, which helps because you're dealing with known quantities, but also makes it harder because there's just a lot fewer of them than if your casting pool is every drag queen in America. Second, this is supposed to be All-Stars. The entire premise is meant to be that it is the best of the best coming back for another round, so you can't cast fodder the same way you would for a standard season. Third, queens can say no if they don't think they have a good chance on the season, and this has become an especially big issue with how the show is produced in more recent seasons. Again, that'll be for a later section of this video. It was well known that prior to Shea Coulee's return for All-Stars 5, a lot of queens kind of hummed and hawed about whether or not to return for All-Stars 3 and 4 because they knew that if Shea accepted, she was going to win. The first factor has been lessened by a few factors of its own. US All-Stars will accept non-US queens to compete, and other All-Stars franchises are seemingly opening the door to that, at least to some degree, with Canada's All-Stars recruiting a queen who's originally on a US season to come back even though she was a Canadian queen herself. As well, queens from all franchises can be invited to compete on a Versus the World franchise. The cast of standard seasons also just keeps getting bigger, which means there's more of a pool for each season coming into it, and they're also willing to invite queens back multiple times to expand their options. The second factor has been lessened by simply playing a lot more fast and loose with their definition of a star, in the sense that they no longer restrict casting to queens who made it pretty far in their original seasons and had a serious chance at winning. Like, Serena Chacha is famously bad at drag and drag race, and I feel comfortable saying that because she relies on AI so heavily. And nobody who's actually good at anything relies on AI. And she got invited back for All-Stars 6 in spite of that. It also helps that the Versus the World franchises are not considered to be all-stars, in the sense that it's more about just bringing queens from different franchises together rather than being the best of the best. That is for global all-stars. And everyone fucking hated that because RuPaul is an awful judge when a queen's first language isn't English and she's not either American or British. The third factor, well, that's why the formats keep changing. All-Stars has struggled to live up to the All-Stars 2 legacy basically ever since it aired, and casting has played a large role in that, but it's because of what made All-Stars 2 so great that the casting of it can never be repeated. When All-Stars 2 came around, there was no guarantee that it would ever happen again, so basically everyone who got invited kind of felt like they had to say yes, even if, maybe they should have held off and they could have won a later All-Stars. Like, Ginger Minj went home second on All-Stars 2, third if you count Adore quitting, and then she went on to win All-Stars 10. And there's nothing controversial about that decision whatsoever. All-Stars 2 was a fierce competition, and while that's very fun for the show and the audience and everyone else, nobody who's competing really wants that kind of fierce competition. They want to win. All-Stars 3 made a mistake in casting Bibi Zahara Benet, the first winner of the franchise, because as much as I love her, that is the sole reason why they introduced the vote at Final Four, and that fucked up that season bad. All-Stars 4 made a great decision in casting Naomi because she's basically the only queen ever willing to actually play hard, but they regretted that choice because it fucked up their plan to crown Manila. All-Stars 5 was impaired by the existence of Shea Coulee as a deterrent for anyone who thought they might have a shot at winning an All-Stars season down the road and so said no to avoid losing to her. All-Stars 8 was some of their worst ever casting combined with some of their worst ever production, leading to basically everyone knowing from the first couple episodes that the season was going to Jimbo, and if not Jimbo, then Candy Muse, and so half the rest of the roster was prepared to quit at one point or another and the vibe was just atrocious. All-Stars 6 is the only time they've genuinely nailed it with casting, in spite of a lot of criticism at the time, and I admit I was part of those critics because I did not think that was going to work. And it happened because they were willing to frame the season as a redemption season rather than a superstar season, and it produced one of the closest and most exciting races for the crown we've really ever seen from this spin-off franchise. I genuinely think if they hadn't already settled on doing all winners after All-Stars 7, they would have kept it up, but then all winners also set a precedent for how queens wanted to be treated by the show in order to be, willing to accept the invite, and they couldn't really undo that precedent. Another challenge here in casting is, and always has been, language. RuPaul in particular is a terrible judge whenever it comes to dealing with someone whose second language is English, followed quickly by anyone whose cultural understanding isn't either American or British. And by British, I mean so stereotypical that it would probably be offensive if the British didn't deserve it. This has always kind of been an undercurrent of the main series because there are a lot of queens who are immigrants who compete, and it has been called out before. But it became a lot more obvious once UK's Drag Race started happening, once Versus the World took off, and once Global All-Stars was inflicted on the audience. To clarify, Versus the World refers to 3 spin-offs for the UK, Canada, and Down Under, where the host country typically gets the most representatives, with 3 or 4, plus 1 or 2 from various other international franchises. You can probably guess how that plays out for the queens from franchises like Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Thailand, the Philippines, or Sweden, whose English is a bit rougher than the Americans, Canadians, and Brits. And even then, it mostly goes to the Americans and the Brits. Anyways, at this point, I think I've said all I can say about casting at this stage, but it is something that we're going to touch on more as we go through the other sections. Part 3. The Challenges. One of the tricky things about turning the art form of drag into a competition, especially a reality TV competition, is that it is really open-ended in terms of what kinds of challenges you can give the queens. There are lots of other kinds of drag or drag-related competitions out there, whether you're talking about the pageant scene, the ballroom scene, or even just contests that are run in bars all over the planet. And while the expression of drag within any of them can be fairly broad, the competition itself is usually pretty narrow. Lip syncing or runways or talent of some sort. Drag Race doesn't, and arguably can't, work like that because Drag Race wants to be all encompassing of drag. It's not looking for Miss Gay USA or handing out trophies for Femme Queen realness. It wants to be the drag equivalent of MMA, where the whole point is to deliberately bring together mismatched competitors who compete differently to see who comes out on top. This is something that a generalist reality competition show like Survivor or Big Brother has a much easier time with, because they can kind of just do a generic test of strength, intelligence, endurance, perception, or whatever else. After all, the challenges in those shows aren't about proving that you're the ultimate puzzle master or whatever. They're just obstacles to overcome or ways to succeed or survive in this bigger competition. Drag Race and other specialist skill competitions like it, like America's Next Top Model or Project Runway or the Great British Bake Off, have to use their challenges both as obstacles and as their skill showcases. In Survivor, there's not really a point during Final Tribal Council where anyone's going to be like, you always performed really well in the challenges where there were puzzles, even if you didn't win, and I particularly like how you stood still with your arm above your head for 6 hours, and that's why I think you should win. But in Drag Race, the judges will routinely comment on what a queen's performance in a challenge demonstrated to them in terms of their growth in the competition or their overall performance that isn't necessarily reflected in their strict track record. Each week has 3 tops, and there's a reason for it. It's a way of recognizing that even if you don't win a challenge, you did still do well in a way that should be factored into the understanding of your place in the competition. Same goes for the 3 bottoms. Even if you were spared from the lip sync, repeatedly placing in the bottom will be held against you in the competition in a way that it isn't for something like Survivor. Like season 25 of Survivor Philippines, Denise Stapley went to every single tribal council. She was up for elimination in almost all of them aside from a couple where she had individual immunity, and then she won the season. And her surviving those tribal councils was considered to be kind of a badge of honor in terms of how well she did in the season. Like she managed to survive always being at risk, but not in the way that Drag Race is going to treat being in the bottom. Not that it's going to treat it like some sort of an indication that you weren't performing as well as the others. And Drag Race, since it's evaluating such a varied art form and is trying to be the MMA of that art form where every style is welcome to throw its hat in the ring, has to be very careful with its challenges. Not just in terms of the types of challenges it presents, but also the order of the challenges it's presenting and the frequency of different types of challenges. For the unaware, Drag Race has roughly 18 core categories of maxi challenges over the course of its lifetime, at least as they're defined by the RuPaul's Drag Race Wiki. There's acting, ball, choreography, commercial, design, girl group, improvisation, lip sync, makeover, music video, photo shoot, roomix, runway, rusical, singing, snatch game, stand-up/roast, and the talent show. Of these 18, 5 of them, the choreography, music video, photo shoot, runway, and singing challenges, are rarely, if ever, used as maxi challenges anymore because they've either been folded into other types of challenges or just aren't as good. So we're not going to worry about those. There are also a lot of mini challenges, but those tend to not be super important for the overall competition, unless you are Lucy LaDuca, hashtag let loose.
Let loose.
Drag Race uses them, to have some fun and maybe have a little bit of a boost in an individual maxi challenge, but they're rarely competitively relevant, aside from maybe the reading challenge, which is a mini challenge where the queens are tasked with taking turns reading each other for filth. And it is one of the funniest, most iconic parts of every season it's in, but it's still not really a big deal. It's more just a chance for queens to prove that they're funny. And or mean, I guess. Additionally, there are a handful of challenges that are uniquely, if informally, considered to be especially important. The wiki lists 6, but I think its version of this list kind of sucks, so instead I'm going to give you a better one that I'll classify as essential challenges. The balls, the girl groups, the makeovers, the room mixes, the rusicals, the snatch game, and the talent show. In a typical current season across most franchises, a queen entering the competition should be operating under the assumption that they will have to compete in at least 5 of these 7 challenges, and their performances in them will be weighted more heavily than in other challenges by both judges and fans. Among these, the Snatch Game is indisputably the most important, but we'll get there in a sec. I'm going to assume that you can intuit what the acting, choreography, music video, photoshoot, runway, singing, and stand-up/rose challenges are, because they really can't get more clear than they already are. But for the rest, we're going to do a quick rundown of what's involved, since they sometimes go a bit further than what you'd assume, and also just hammer home how much someone is expected to bring to this challenge, bring to this competition, bring to this show. Ball challenges are essential challenges that involve the queens being asked to present 3 categories on the runway, typically all tied to some overarching theme, and with at least the final look having to be constructed in the workroom as part of the challenge. Queens are evaluated on the looks themselves in terms of how the queens interpreted the categories and met the brief, typically with the final look being the most heavily weighted as a demonstration of not only their taste levels, but design skills, particularly if the ball involves unconventional materials like hair, which yes, it has involved in the past. Commercial challenges, also called branding challenges, involve the queens writing, directing, and acting in a commercial to either promote a real product, a fake one provided to them by the show, or a fictional one of their choosing. Typically, part of the point of this challenge is not only to advertise the product, but to use it as a way to reflect the queen's own brand as well. However, sincerity is not really part of this one. Like, aside from Bibi Zahara Benet, who didn't really understand the soup can challenge in her All-Stars 3 season, it's not really meant to be literal. If the ad isn't outright comedy, it needs to be at least a little bit tongue-in-cheek. It does not need to be feasible or, like, practical to make. And queens are evaluated on their concept, the final ad, and the overall presentation. This is one of 2 types of challenges that has historically been modified during presidential elections in the United States. Most other franchises don't have consistent election years that can be planned around them in advance, like, Drag Race films the summer before. So US is kind of the only one that has this. But anyways, it does turn these into a political challenge where the commercials have to be political campaign or attack ads. Design challenges involve the queens designing and constructing a look for the runway. Don't confuse it with the ball because there's only one look involved, or the runway challenge because this look still has to be made in the workroom. Also, sometimes Drag Race decides, what if this was an interior design challenge instead, and tasks the queens with, like, designing a hotel room or a club. Typically, the challenge of this is that the queens have to either construct a very difficult or unusual look, such as a wedding dress, a wearable boat, or like a nude look, or work with unconventional materials, such as curtains, Christmas decorations, or single-use papers, plastics, or metals. Or sometimes they're just given random boxes of shit that correspond to stuff like past contestants, past challenges, or various regions, professions, celebrations, and pieces of media in Canada. Regardless, they're judged for their design ability, including not just how good or bad a look is, but also how complex, refined, and challenging it would have been to make. Or at least, how complex, refined, and challenging they make it look like it would have been to make. Girl group challenges are essential challenges that involve the queens being split up into small groups and having to write and record a song together that they'll lip sync to on the main stage. Usually the chorus of the song is already written and recorded by another artist, and the instrumentals are provided as well, but beyond that, how they split the rest up is up to them. They'll be judged not only on their songwriting and singing, but also their choreography, the cohesiveness of their looks, and just generally how well they work together as a girl group. Improv challenges involve the queens being given an unscripted scenario to improvise their way through, usually either in the form of a comedy skit where they're given a rough outline of how the concept is supposed to play out that they have to improv through, or in the form of a parody of a talk show, news station, or other live form of media. Queens are evaluated on their ability to just generally be funny and successfully improv, with queens getting dinged if they're trying too hard to stick to a script, shutting other queens down, or just not reacting quickly enough. This is the other type of challenge that gets modified for US presidential election years, with it becoming a parody of a presidential debate. Lip sync challenges are... It's kind of what it says on the tin, I guess, but it's a little bit more expanded than that, we'll say. Sometimes it's just, straightforwardly taking turns lip syncing, but usually it's a lip sync Lollapalooza. Basically just a single elimination lip syncing tournament where queens are either trying to win lip syncs to advance further for a prize, or where losing queens have to keep competing until there's only one left standing, at which point she will be eliminated. This style of challenge just kind of exists because lip syncs are fun to watch and because it's an opportunity for the show to let its strongest performers, who don't usually end up in the bottom in a regular season, show off their abilities. Makeover challenges are essential challenges that involve each queen being assigned a partner to make over, typically on some sort of a theme with the supposed goal of demonstrating, quote, drag family resemblance between the queen and her partner. The partners are all usually part of some shared group, such as older gay men, straight men, male influencers, female athletes, little people, or have some sort of connection directly to this show or its competitors, such as family members of contestants, members of the show's production team, or previously eliminated contestants from the season. While the challenge is theoretically about judging the ability of the queens to make their partners into drag queens that share their aesthetic, this is an infamously inconsistent challenge on that front. And Michelle Visage in particular has become so well known for offering some genuinely insane arguments for what does or does not meet the brief in terms of what they're like actually judging. that it mostly just turns into which of these queens do we want to eliminate, but we can't really come up with a good reason for. Remix challenges are essential challenges that involve the queens writing and recording their own original verses for existing RuPaul songs, with Ru's chorus being kept from the original song, but basically everything else being up to the queens. In addition to that, the queens will have to either perform the song on the main stage or shoot a music video for it, which is why it's replaced the music video and singing challenges from older seasons for the most part. Also, even if the challenge is being performed in groups, it's not a girl group challenge. Anytime it's a Ru song, it's a Ru mix, because RuPaul will literally die if she doesn't brand everything in line of sight within an inch of its life with her own name. These challenges are evaluated in terms of songwriting, the vocals, and the performance, and has become a challenge where both the very best and very worst verses go down in history. Oh my god, babe, wake up, it's dawn. Joey J is a gay-ass bitch. Roxy Andrews is here to make it clear. Denali's gonna triple lutz on these sluts because she likes it rough. Your dad just calls Yekaterina Petrovna Zamolodchikova Katya. And whether it's fashion, beauty, runway, or pose, Isis nails it on the nose. If you've ever heard some variant of, come on Mama Ru, I'm gonna snatch the crown, it's the fault of this challenge. If you've ever been stuck at Gay Guy Music Video Night, a sacred ritual as we all well know, and have not been forced to watch at least one of these, your gay guys don't have enough of a sense of humor or taste. Rusical challenges are essential challenges that involve the queens acting, singing, and dancing in a pre-written musical, usually either parodying an existing one like Bitch Perfect for Pitch Perfect, Moulin Rouge for Moulin Rouge, Wig Loose for, Footloose, or The Sound of Rusic for The Sound of Music. Alternatively, it's just covering a celebrity either positively, as has been done with Cher, Madonna, and Joan Crawford, or negatively, as has been done with Trump during his first administration. Sometimes they're kind of more original concepts as well. History of the World was a musical about famous women from history, ranging from Annie Oakley to the biblical Eve. Halftime Headliners was a musical about artists who've done the Super Bowl halftime show over the years. Shade was an original story about a fictional drag queen's life and career, mostly just because they had some actual American Idol contestants on that season, so they could actually get them to sing a bit. Glamazonian Airlines was about a drag queen airline, Boeing if it slayed, and Pharmaceutical was about a drag queen pharmaceutical company, Purdue if it slayed. Sometimes the queens are expected to sing live, while other seasons they use pre-recorded vocals, i.e. if they don't have Courtney Act and Adore Delano, but typically they do still have to actually memorize the script and perform it live on the main stage along with choreo and any stunts involved, and queens can be judged on basically any part of their performance that was under their control. I.e. if they didn't write the lyrics, they're not on the hook for the songwriting, kinda, but they are on the hook if they fail to deliver a line, even if it is kind of a shit line. The talent show is an essential challenge, kinda depends a bit more on the franchise here, where queens are given a minute to perform an act for a variety show. Queens can bring their own props and set pieces and whatever else they need, within reason, and so long as it's a talent that can be performed in a minute and can be broadcast on television, anything goes. Most queens default to either performing an original song or a dance routine, but there's also a lot of room for flexing unique skills that Drag Race might not normally be able to showcase. Queens have painted a picture live on stage, done gymnastics routines, juggled knives, sang opera, done traditional dances from various cultures, recited a spoken word poem about their genitals, jumped rope with their hair, performed interpretive dances about the COVID-19 pandemic involving throwing spaghetti and a toaster into a bathtub to an Enya song, and played instruments including the harpsichord, violin, guitar, flute, and probably much more that I'm forgetting. Given how open-ended it is, queens are usually evaluated on just how generally entertaining they were, as well as how successfully they were performed. And there's not a lot of grace given for queens who forget the words to their own songs or wipe out performing their own original choreo. Snatch Game is not only an essential challenge, it is the essential challenge. Introduced in season 2 and appearing in literally every subsequent season of the show across all franchises and formats, almost. I think it actually got missed in the last season. I didn't watch that one to be fair, but I don't think anyone else really paid attention, so who knows? Regardless, it is the most important challenge in the show by far, so we're going to take a little bit of extra time with it. Snatch Game is a parody of Match Game, a game show first invented in the 60s that's been coming back every now and then ever since. The original format was to have the show's hosts ask a fill-in-the-blank question to the episode's 2 celebrity panelists, as well to the episode's contestants. The contestants will get a point if they can provide the same answer as one of the panelists, with the person with the most points winning. Snatch Game parodies this by making the queens impersonate celebrities and compete as contestants, with RuPaul as hosts and usually either the episode's guest judges, a couple past contestants, or some members of the pit crew serving as panelists. Instead of actually trying to match the panelists, the point of the challenge is a multifaceted improv, impersonation, comedy challenge, with queens expected to provide answers that are in character and funny while bantering with each other and with RuPaul. This is a famously hard challenge to succeed in. Filming typically runs for at least an hour or two. There's no live audience that can react or applaud or cheer or laugh or whatever to give you any sort of a sense for how your jokes are landing. And the pressure is on to do well. Snatch Game is the make or break for queens. RuPaul straight up says that it's the point that separates, quote, the basic bitches from the fierce ass queens. It usually occurs about halfway through a season, sometimes a little bit earlier, and a queen's performance in it is weighted super heavily by everyone, even if it's kind of unofficial. Winning the Snatch Game is a badge of honor in a way that no other challenge really is, though. And the reason this is important for our purposes is that it's a clear communication of what the competition actually is trying to evaluate the queens on. Similar to the lip sync for your life being a demonstration of Drag Race considering lip syncing to be fundamentally important to drag as an art form, Snatch Game is a demonstration of Drag Race's stance that impersonation and improv comedy are both considered fundamental to drag in general, as well as specifically within this competition. Winning Snatch Game doesn't mean you'll win your season. In fact, only 6 winners of the 17 main series Snatch Games and 6 winners of the 10 All-Star Snatch Games have actually gone on to either win their season or a spin-off. There's a lot of competition still left, but it does serve as a major filter. Only 2 people have ever placed bottom for Snatch Game in the main series and gone on to win their season. And that includes one time where everyone except for one person all got put in the bottom for doing so poorly that time. Even if we factor in literally every franchise outside of Celebrity Drag Race, because who counts that? As of time of recording, I believe only 8 queens have ever been put up for elimination because of their Snatch Game and gone on to win their season out of these 79 Snatch Games that have happened. 2 in the main US series, 1 in US All-Stars, 2 in Canada, 1 in France, and 2 in the UK. To put that into context, you are more likely to actually win multiple Snatch Games across multiple seasons than you are to win your own season after losing Snatch Game. What's more, once All-Stars and Versus the World and all these other spin-offs became part of the picture, Snatch Game became a key part of the pseudo-audition process to come back. 10 main series Snatch Game winners have returned for at least 1 All-Stars performance, and of the remaining 8 winners, 3 won their original seasons but weren't invited back to all winners, and 3 more are from the last 4 seasons, so there just hasn't been a ton of time to get invited back. All this to say, Snatch Game is important. In combination with all the other challenges, it can teach us a lot about how competitions are structured in general. It's really common across a lot of competitions to have some sort of a mid-season check-in point as a way to filter for who has a real chance versus who's probably out of the running, or just to scout for who's an all-star in the making. The NHL has its All-Stars game, the NBA has the NBA Cup, the MLB has the All-Star Game or Midsummer Classic, Survivor has the Merge, and more recently has made this even more explicit with the Earn the Merge challenge. Mario Party sees all points double for the last 5 turns, and so on and so forth. And this sort of thing is actually really good for competitions, both for competitors and spectators. It gives everyone a chance to reevaluate the progress of the competition, the standings, the standouts, the flops, and to reset for the latter half of the competition. In the midst of a competition, it can get really easy to get bogged down in the overwhelming amount of shit that's happening. And so whether it's officially a midpoint that will be evaluated as part of the competition, like with the NBA or Drag Race, a way to mark a change in the competition structure like with Survivor or Mario Party, or just a bit of an unofficial reset like with the NHL or the MLB, this is a really common thing, and it is good that Drag Race has something like this. And again, to reiterate, that also isn't to say that Drag Race's other challenges don't matter. They do. Everything adds up, and the huge variety of challenges exist to not only give room for all different types of drag queens to have a chance to shine, but also to give queens an opportunity to build a portfolio both for the competition itself and beyond. And this presents a real challenge for Drag Race because it is fundamentally impossible for this to be fair to everyone because this is an elimination competition where you don't get to choose what you're going to compete in first. Part of why the talent show has kind of become an essential challenge over the years is because it's basically the only way that everyone can agree that everyone's being given a fair shot to show their best self before someone starts getting eliminated. Otherwise the first episode is usually a design challenge, and that usually means someone's going to get sent home because they can't design a garment, even if that's really their only weakness. But also, that's one of the things that makes Drag Race feel like a real competition. The stakes are high, and even though you don't know what the week's challenge will be in advance, you do know there's always a chance to save yourself with a lip sync for your life. Queens who know the challenge is one they struggled at will usually immediately begin preparing to lip sync, rehearsing the song and figuring out what they're going to do for it. And that sort of thing is what makes all this work. By having that fallback, Drag Race is allowed to have a really varied competition where it's expected that nobody is going to be good at everything. And they're not just fucked because they suck at acting one week. As well, while the judging is usually pretty subjective on a lot of these challenges, it is still always filtered through the consistent lens of the host. Queens are under no uncertain terms on that front. When it comes to Snatch Game in particular, queens are consistently reminded that their objective is to make Rue laugh, not some imagined audience outside of the show or whatever, Rue. The problem emerges when the judging isn't consistent, and while there's always room for dispute for most challenges, there are some where the judging has been notoriously atrocious. The makeover challenge is infamous among fans for always just being some bullshit because nobody agrees on what drag family resemblance actually means. And I think Michelle Visage basically just rolls some dice to decide who she hates that week before bending over backwards to justify it and send them home. What's more, something I've alluded to before is that Drag Race typically has a message it is trying to communicate with each season of the show in terms of what it thinks is important to drag, what's important to the show, and what it sees as being a priority for America's Next Drag Superstar or Canada's Next Drag Superstar or whatever to be able to embody, and challenges play a huge role in that. This definitely biases seasons in favor of certain queens over others, but that's also not inherently a bad thing. Season 3 was straightforwardly biased in favor of fashion because the goal of that season was to communicate the importance of fashion to drag and vice versa. Raja was recruited personally by RuPaul to compete, and of the season's 12 challenges, a third of them involved designing outfits. What's more, this season is the only one to feature 2 ball challenges, and for both of them, All 3 looks had to be constructed at the show instead of just one. Even if Raja didn't win all of those, they were all still challenges they could be confident she would be good at. Add to that the fact that Raja was part of America's Next Top Model and personally knew Tyra Banks and did hair and makeup for a ton of celebrities, the show also assumed she'd probably do pretty well at Snatch Game and the Makeover. The other queens did give her a run for her money, and it's not like Raja didn't earn her win and work hard to maintain her legacy as the premier fashion queen of the franchise, but it is also necessary to understand how the challenges play into all of this if we're going to understand how a competition can stop being competitive over time. But it's also not just about the challenges. This doesn't happen in a bubble. Instead, it is presented to an audience. So what's their deal?
Ain't nobody's business.
Part 4. The audience. This section will be relatively short because while it's simple, it's still really relevant for one huge reason. The real race does not start until after the show is over. Queens aren't just competing for the crown and scepter and the title of America's or Canada's or the UK's or wherever else is next drag superstar. They are competing for fans against each other and every other past contestant of the show. This is their livelihood, and their life will change dramatically based on how the audience perceives them. Will they buy their merch? Will they stream their music? Will they buy tickets to their shows? Will they tip them at the bars? Will they watch their YouTube videos or their Twitch streams? Will they buy their makeup? The show is their chance to establish their brand, build their fan base, and set up the rest of their professional life. And that's kind of a scary thing to consider, given how fucked up the Drag Race fandom has been towards its queens. This is a notoriously obsessive and cruel fandom, even amongst the scale and scope of reality television. And there's a few key reasons for that. For one, a lot of gay people do still have internalized homophobia that they'll let out at the fruitiest amongst us if they rub them the wrong way. For another, fans know the importance of the show for the future of their faves, and so they get emotionally invested in the success of their favorite queens and see the success of others at the expense of those faves as a genuinely offensive personal slight that they lash back at. There's also the reality that being a queer person doesn't magically make you progressive on every front or anything like that, and RuPaul does not help there. Her approach to queens with accents or who speak English as a bit of a rough second language is mirrored by fans, as has been her approach to fat queens and non-American queens who she tends to just viciously stereotype. Drag Race in general has also had issues with racism, sexism, and most notably transphobia over the years, with RuPaul being pretty unequivocal about not wanting trans women to compete on the show in the early years because, in her eyes, it was the equivalent of allowing doping into the Olympics. Keep in mind, it has never been against the rules to have any sort of cosmetic work done before appearing on Drag Race, and All Stars in particular is infamous for queens coming back with pumped lips and plastic skin. Even if the argument is that having the procedures involved with transitioning is somehow unfair, there's no argument that supports that doesn't also cut out queens like Detox long before she transitioned, because she was still getting those kinds of procedures. What this did was really just push a lot of people into the closet, but whatever. And to Rue's credit, Rue did eventually walk this back. It did take a lot of pushing, during which time she infamously accidentally posted the trains flag instead of the trans flag in a tweet about how the only thing they've ever screened for was charisma, uniqueness, nerve, and talent. And also she blocked Courtney Act about, I think, one of the many slurs they said on the early seasons. Again, it was a wild show. But it is worth noting that drag has evolved, or at least Drag Race has evolved on this. Some of it also just comes down to a pretty rapidly evolving understanding of transness for a lot of queer people in general, especially in terms of certain words and phrases that weren't originally meant as transphobic when the show started using them, even though they definitely should have known better. For example, while Rue currently says, "Ooh girl, she already done had herses," which I am so sorry for that. To kick off each episode in the workroom, it used to be more of a Survivor reference, because on Survivor, the castaways would get notes from production to explain what was coming in the episode that were called Tree Mail. Rue combined this with a reference to the classic "You've Got Mail," and came up with, "Ooh girl, you got," and ended it with a transphobic slur that you can probably guess because it rhymes with email. This sort of change, both in terms of removing a lot of that language from the show, as well as opening up casting to not only include trans women, but trans men, cis women, and eventually even a heterosexual cis man, came from audience pushback, which is important to understand because it shows how the show bends to its audience. However, what I want to talk about most is how the fans influence the competition itself. The first aspect of this is one we already touched on with the formats, with the All-Stars formats all existing as attempts by the show to try and wash their hands of the responsibility of sending their fan favorites home. Because when they do that, people get mad at them. Even on the main series, especially after Valentina on season 9, the show has been trying its best to predict who will be a fan favorite and treat them accordingly throughout, which also means that if the show thinks that you won't be a fan favorite, sucks to suck, you're a lot safer to eliminate, and it is a lot less worth it to reward you over those assumed fan favorites. And while the show does have biases in all directions, racism has always been a prominent factor in all of this in a way that affects casting, judging, and placements on the show. Not only because the show wants to give its audience what it wants, but also because it will have to work harder to justify its decision to crown a black queen over a white queen if it doesn't want to get yelled at. Lots of black queens have spoken openly about how they're treated by fans at events and meet and greets as less than their white colleagues, and often get disproportionate hate for basically everything they do. But let's say we set all that aside, we ignore all of that as if we are a Drag Race producer. It is still worth acknowledging that Drag Race fans are known to be pretty horrible to their contestants. Hateful, mean comments on every platform are basically a default for everybody, with tons of quote-unquote fans seemingly just deciding that the normal way to talk to a stranger online is to tell them how ugly and untalented and stupid and funny and worthless they are and that they should kill themselves, or they deserve to be abandoned by their parents, or abused by their partners, or sexually assaulted by whoever assaulted them, or whatever other horrible shit they can think of because they didn't like them on TV. Multiple subreddits and YouTube channels exist purely to shit on these queens viciously, ripping apart every frame of their season to justify why they deserve this cruelty. This all influences the competition. It influences every competition. Professional sports are affected by the fans too, whether it's making rule changes to accommodate audience demands, signing or not signing certain players because of what the fans will respond positively or negatively to, or adding or moving franchises based on where there are fans with money to pay for it. In particular, the rise of sports betting and prediction markets has made players victim to the anger of the fans whenever they fuck up someone's parlay, which is one of a huge multitude of reasons why they just should be straight up banned. And I really need everyone to get on board with us never doing this for Drag Race, because if we start introducing gambling like on a regular basis to Drag Race, someone's gonna get killed. We need to not. Don't start. Poly market, don't touch Drag Race, please. Regardless though, it's just that in most competitions, it's not really the fault of the league or the game or the broadcaster or anyone else how it turns out. Changing outcomes to meet fan expectations is only really in the hands of the players, and there are also some pretty strict rules for them about stuff like throwing matches or whatever that make it pretty hard to get away with it, even if it is a hyper-competitive professional athlete who did, just decide to lose for fun and or money and or popularity. For Drag Race, the show's outcomes can bend to the audience, and it can be a lot more tangible. That is especially noticeable now with All-Stars, and especially with how many winners of recent seasons have felt this show's attempt to right what it sees as its wrongs of its past by just using them as excuses to crown queens with the franchise feels like should be in its pantheon of winners. See also Global All-Stars, and All-Stars 10, and Canada vs. the World 1, and so on and so forth. This brings us back to the issue of how the All-Stars formats exist to try and turn a contestant versus show competition into a contestant versus contestant competition. Drag Race has never managed to really do it successfully, and it is almost entirely a consequence of the Drag Race fandom. See, the more successful a queen is, the more frequently she'll get the power to eliminate someone or will affect someone's progress in the competition when it's a contestant versus contestant format. And that's a punishment, not a reward. Every queen you eliminate will negatively affect your career by alienating their fans, if not outright turning them hostile. And while that happens under standard formats, there's not really any choice for the queens in that matter. End of the day, all but the most rabid fans will understand that it's not a queen's fault if they stay in a lip sync while their fave is eliminated. All-Stars, by contrast, is almost always different. If you pull a queen's lipstick or you vote for her or whatever else, it's on you. And this fear of fan backlash, which, again, has sometimes gotten really harsh, leads queens to near universally play it extremely safe. Almost every single vote to eliminate under the Roomocracy format was unanimous, sometimes to the extent of the eliminated queen herself even voting to send herself home. Even the appearance of trying to play strategically is typically immediately punished. It happened to Morgan McMichaels in All-Stars 3, and it happened to India Farah in All-Stars 5. The fandom for this show allows it to reach some amazing highs as a consequence of being so passionate and public about their love for it, but it's also a very constrictive electric fence around the show's competition. And the queens themselves, if we're being honest, know about that and rely on it in their own ways. Someone like Shea Coulee in All-Stars 5 is relying on the knowledge that not only is she the strongest competitor, but she's also got a very loyal fan base that's gonna be scary to piss off. The smart, dramatic, exciting thing to do would be to eliminate her the first chance you get, like how it would have been smart to eliminate Parvati and Sandra right away in Heroes vs. Villains on Survivor. And yet, nobody did. The most vulnerable queens on All-Stars are the ones who, when the other queens run the numbers in their head, are the least likely to result in backlash, or at least the lowest amount of backlash out of all the available options. Track record plays a role in that too, but not universally. And that sort of backlash exists in any reality competition show with returning contestants. But the difference for Drag Race is that this is their career, and it's a career that relies on having a dedicated, sizable fan base who have the willingness and the passion for you to give you a whole bunch of money. Your career as a drag artist hinges on your ability to get booked, and you won't get booked if you don't have fans or if everyone hates you and have to actively avoid shows you're booked for regardless of who else is there. Some queens have come back and used All-Stars to rebuild a damaged reputation, most notably Silky and Raja on All-Stars 6. But many others have come back and seen it stain their reputations and therefore their careers, sometimes kind of irreversibly. The queens are incentivized by the fandom to play fair under the threat of career suicide, but that fairness isn't really based on the competition itself as much as who's the most famous on the outside. That's why, even though the fair thing would have probably been to eliminate Trixie Mattel on All-Stars 3, several times, it never happened. And that's why, the one time someone was probably gonna do it, they decided to hide the lipstick and not reveal who they picked out of fear of backlash. However, all of this is setting aside one aspect of the fan influence that I've neglected until now. And that is their rapidly escalating and increasingly unrealistic expectation for queens on the show in terms of budget. Part 5. The Runways. When a queen is cast on Drag Race, she's told when she'll need to show up to film, how many looks she'll need, what categories the looks will be in, and any other special requirements involved. Given that a typical season will have between 14 and 16 queens at this point, that usually means that queens need to prepare for 12 competitive episodes. Given that it's also likely that the queens will have some existing outfits that meet a couple of the categories, they probably don't have to get brand new outfits for all of them, but between runways and the entrance look, plus, the premiere look or the promo look, plus maxi challenges like the makeover, the snatch game, the ball, and any other challenges where they're expected to bring a specific look in addition to the runway, and a couple of mini challenges, of course, you're probably looking at about 15 to 20 new full looks. And that means each look will also need makeup, wigs, shoes, nails, jewelry, and whatever other accessories might be part of it. And it all needs to fit into 5 50-pound suitcases. Information about the prep time they have is limited and inconsistent, but in recent years it seems like the queens are typically given about 4 to 6 weeks to prepare for all of that. Sometimes substantially less if they were, an alternate or if they were a filler because there was a queen who dropped out or couldn't compete for whatever reason, which is even more ridiculous. Outside of All-Stars 9, queens aren't typically given any additional resources or a stipend to prepare for the show either, and there's also no real information about the order that they'll actually be doing the categories on the show. They can't plan this out in terms of I need to spend all my money on this first look that I know I'm going to be shown in, and then maybe, budget accordingly if I assume I'm not going to make it super far. Let's put this into context by imagining a much easier task. Imagine I asked you to join me for a road trip across Canada. This road trip will take 10 days, and in order to make it super Instagrammable or whatever, I need us to have coordinated outfits for each day. We're leaving in 3 weeks, and I have some specific requirements. Nothing high fashion or anything, but there are going to be a lot of very specific articles or patterns or color combos, most of which you don't already have, and also I haven't actually told you what I will be wearing for sure. I've just given you kind of a mood board, so you're not super sure how best to coordinate with me. My outfits will be expensive though. I'll be wearing nice brands. The average look will probably cost me about $350 when it's all said and done. I'm not going to kick you off the road trip if you fail to bring good looks or if your looks are noticeably cheaper than mine, but probably won't bring you along for the next one, and people are probably going to be mean to you in the comments about them. You'll also have to pack all those looks into one backpack and one full-size suitcase, and that includes shoes, hats, etc. And you'll need all of that because these aren't just let's put on a t-shirt and board shorts outfits. I expect you to have everything from your socks to your sunglasses on theme. Think to yourself how much time you would realistically need to put together 10 full new outfits that meet specific criteria and would look nice enough that you could feel confident posting them on Instagram and posts that are specifically drawing attention to your clothing choices. Sure, you could just Amazon it all, but is it going to look like Amazon? It's probably going to look like Amazon. And I am not going to be wearing anything that looks like I got here with 2-day Prime shipping. Think about how much money this would cost you, especially because you only have a few weeks and you can't afford to just not go to work while you hunt down deals at every mall within 250 kilometers. Imagine the stress of committing to an expensive look with expedited shipping to make sure it arrives on time, while also not being confident it's actually going to match with what I'm wearing. Maybe you bring some follow-ups or some backups in case something that you brought doesn't work. That just adds to the cost, that adds the number of outfits, and that makes it harder to pack everything together because there's only so much room. Realistically, what kind of budget do you think you'd need to be able to pull that off and be happy with the outcome? Probably somewhere around, $1,500, but probably closer to $2,000 at the minimum. Again, we're talking about buying basically new everything. A new pair of shoes, new pants, new socks, everything. And that's not including the loss of income from taking 2 weeks off of work for the trip itself. Now imagine you need to double the looks. They all need to be runway ready. They all need to come with wigs and shoes and all that other shit. And also, that there are a dozen other people who are all doing the exact same thing at the exact same time at the exact same deadline. Why does that matter? Like that last part in particular. Well, because odds are that you're going to need to talk to some designers for some of these looks. After all, you can't necessarily do all of it yourself. Not every drag queen's a designer. But even the ones who are, that's a lot to prepare in a relatively short amount of time. And sometimes you want something specific that you can't do, like maybe a latex look. That requires a professional. Problem is, everyone else also is going to need to talk to some designers. The high demand, inflexible deadlines, and limited number of designers makes their prices skyrocket, making it far more expensive than custom fashion would already be. And that's even more of an issue as it's been revealed that multiple major designers have ended up completely shafting a ton of queens on some very expensive drag race looks. And fans do expect a lot now. They've been spoiled by the absolutely brilliant fashion shown previously on the runway, and everyone wants to one-up it. They need to. Again, this is part of their career, especially if they're meant to be a fashion queen. And what's more, nobody wants to be known for having the fucked up looks every week. Again, the fans are mean, and the show is not known for being forgiving in its commentary when it comes to this. What's more, queens are often canceling gigs and taking time off of work for the show, which means that it will not only be very expensive in terms of price tags, but also very expensive in terms of lost opportunity. Especially, honestly, for All-Star seasons, where the expectations are much higher, and the kinds of gigs queens are canceling are bigger. There's a lot more that they tend to lose out on for going back to All-Stars. In early seasons, it wasn't like this. The bar wasn't this high. But nowadays, there is insane pressure on the queens, and it's understandable that they feel like they have to cave to it. They've seen queens get mercilessly bullied for years over a fucked up look or two. Kennedy Davenport dressed up in whatever the fuck that was, where she got gutted by Trade who didn't like the session, and they've been talking about that for over a decade now. They've also seen queens' careers take off because of a beautiful look that stole everyone's breath. They know this is their one chance to make an impression, and the looks are a huge amount of what sticks around after the season is done. An article from James Factora in Them is illuminating about how much the show actually costs queens. Lexi Love on season 17 mentions taking out a second mortgage on her home to pay for her runways. Heidi N Closet spent $4,000 for her first season, about $40,000 for All Stars, and that's after canceling $60,000 worth of gigs. Hershey LaCourgette had her car repossessed to pay for her looks. Mistress Isabel Brooks says she paid about $60,000 for her looks on season 15, and another $40,000 just for the finale look. Plastique Tiara, who was a contestant on All Stars 9, where she got $75,000 for appearing on the show, including a $25,000 clothing stipend, is rumored to have spent $250,000 on her runway package. And frankly, it fucking showed. Like, she looked unbelievable, and I doubt she regrets a penny she spent. She's probably earned it all back and more by now. But imagine what that does to the competition when you aren't required to have this kind of cash to burn, but it is certainly encouraged and low-key expected. And keep in mind, you also might go home first. Imagine you spent $20,000 on a drag race runway package only to be your season's pork chop. You wouldn't be the first. A lot of people are discouraged from competing or even auditioning because they are working class queer people who would need to make some very hard financial decisions in order to do it. And that's assuming those are even financial decisions they're able to make. Not everyone has access to $60,000 in cash or equity or credit at the drop of a hat. You can't exactly go to the bank and be like, hey, I need a loan to go compete on a reality competition show. Like, that doesn't tend to happen. And you don't have a lot of time to sort that shit out with the bank. If you don't have the money to spend, you need the time or friends to help you make your looks. And if you don't live in a place with a big drag community, or you don't have the ability to take time off of work if you want to pay your bills, or you don't even have enough money to pay for the materials to construct your looks, that might just not be an option. You don't need to spend $250,000 to win your season. Plastique lost hers with $250,000, and Evie Oddly won her original season after only spending $14,000. But she also said that she knew from the minute she walked in that she had been outspent by everyone else and not by any small margin. And crucially, she also got read to filth for her looks throughout pretty much the entire season, and it was a major point of contention with the judges, the other queens, and the fans. And again, Evie won. But it's also not like she recouped her costs immediately. For one, the show usually films its main seasons in the spring or summer and then starts airing either in late December or early January. Then it'll take like 3 months for the season to air and declare a winner. That $14,000 couldn't be repaid until then. Or at least, that's when she was declared to have won her $100,000. She allegedly didn't actually receive her check for over a year after that, meaning 2 full years between when she had to incur the expenses and when she actually got her prize. And remember, that's financially the best case scenario. A low investment of less than $1,000 per look, then winning the show. Only one person wins. Only 4, maybe, sometimes 5, sometimes only 3, sometimes only 2, get to show every look they brought. A majority will show less than half on the show, leaving them with likely tens of thousands of dollars worth of garments that were never used. And you can't exactly return custom couture for store credit. And it's really easy to understand why the queens feel the need to do it. Bosco, who was insanely talented and beautiful on her first season, but also was a barista who didn't exactly have big bucks to spend, especially considering she was saving for her transition, got eaten fucking alive for having multiple looks that were just a bra and panty. Like, it's not even really her fault, if you think about it. She had a lot of other good looks, but the roll of the dice just had all her bra and panty looks come up back to back to back, and it made it look like it was worse than it was. She was treated like she had no taste, no fashion sense, and like she couldn't compete or hold her own with these other queens. Like, low-key, I don't even want to know what she spent for All-Stars 10, but she came back with a cinched fucking coffin. And like, of course she did. She felt the need to redeem herself. And every other queen wants to avoid being treated like that. People have seen it happen with like Chi Chi DeVayne as well, who was pretty broke on her original season. When she came back for All-Stars, a lot of her looks looked like they were meant to just prove that she no longer was poor. Fans want to see beautiful clothes. And I don't even necessarily think the fans are wrong to enjoy the beautiful clothes. The thing the fans are wrong about is being so cruel to the queens who don't have the resources and networks that other queens have. But like, everyone wants to see glamour. Everyone loves it. Like, fashion is fun. But it all comes back to the competition. The higher the price to enter and not embarrass yourself gets, and the more demanding the economy gets with more jobs lost to AI and basically everyone who's not C-suite being viciously underpaid, the fewer people who are willing to compete. It cuts out a lot of people who might be genuinely super talented and could be America's next drag superstar, but don't have the money. And if that had always been the case for Drag Race, many of its most iconic contestants would not have been on the show. Drag Race as a franchise refuses to provide stipends and refuses to raise the price to a reasonable level, in spite of the fact that it demands so much, and the demands keep increasing while the incentives don't keep up with that inflation. Like, Survivor's been giving away $1 million since, 2001? It's harder to win Drag Race than Survivor. It's certainly more expensive to play Drag Race. I think that's at least pretty easy to agree, but like, I would also argue that Survivor is, probably grand scheme of things less taxing. And believe it or not, this sort of thing is not unique to Drag Race. This happens in a lot of competitions. A lot of competitions lose out on their ability to truly find the most talented competitors because of finances that are not relevant to the competition but fuck them over anyways. As someone who played hockey, that's a pretty obvious example, as it is one of the most expensive major sports by far, just as a baseline cost. Hockey equipment costs a couple $100s on the low end and needs to be replaced to keep up with kids as they grow, plus registration fees that have to help pay for all the infrastructure, plus the extensive travel for basically any meaningfully competitive level of the sport. And like, that's just the game itself. There's at least one practice a week, dryland training once a week on top of it, probably at least a couple week-long hockey camps every summer, spring hockey travel, and hotels for tournaments, playing for team-branded gear, yes, even for the kids, they get the tracksuits, I still have most of mine somewhere, and so much more. There is no way under our current organization and execution of the economy for any competition to truly be able to guarantee that it is a meritocracy that finds the best of the best, because they will always inherently have an asterisk. It's the best of the best out of all the kids whose parents can drive them to games and practices and training in the camps and the tournaments and pay for equipment and also don't have to worry that their kid breaking an ankle is going to bankrupt them from medical debt. And also, who can afford to live in the biggest cities where the best opportunities exist and who can afford to get all the nutritious food that they need and all this other shit. Not to turn this into another capitalism bad video, I know that I make a lot of those, but capitalism does kill competitions in their cradles by inherently kneecapping the ability of everyone to prove their skill by putting the competition behind both formal and informal paywalls. Like, and you might even say that this isn't necessarily a fair comparison because yes, on Drag Race, their looks might change how they advance in the competition, whatever. That is true in other sports too. Richer kids can pay for better hockey sticks, better skates, lighter gear, better protection. That happens in every competition where there's any sort of financial involvement in terms of equipment. And there's no reason why Drag Race can't give its queens a stipend or more time to prepare, knowing that they are extending the seasons and the number of looks needed as a result. It's greed from the show itself, and it's greed that hurts its own ability to be the competition full of iconic looks that it wants to be. But that's also not the only way the show is hurting itself.
Nobody here ever seen him before.
Part 6. The winners.
Who is she?
I'm going to be upfront here. Drag Race doesn't really have any truly bad or undeserving winners, at least not within the context of the competition. Sharon and Tyra have disgraced themselves outside of it, but there's nobody whose win is like wholly unjustifiable. However, as far as the death of competition goes, it has done an increasingly terrible job of justifying its decisions here, and it is one of the things that hurts the show's long-term ability to survive more than anything. See, lots of seasons have had obvious winners that the show was clearly aiming for. Season 3, Season 6, Season 8, Season 10, All Stars 2. All seasons that very clearly communicated the intended winner basically from the jump. However, in all of those seasons, it did a pretty good job of justifying why they got that outcome. The preferred winners were all exceptionally talented, held their own and then some throughout the competition, and were shown earning the crown via the season itself. However, recent seasons have kind of just abandoned that. In the main series, it feels like they don't know how to put together the edit anymore, with storylines and narratives being pretty bad at actually leading to a winner. And I'm not saying that because I don't think Anya Nerve deserved to win, but because it's very confusing how the show didn't give her an edit that really justified that decision the way it easily could have. And I know it could have, because for one, she had the track record, but also because there were like 3 other queens that season who did get that edit in spite of the fact that they didn't even make it to the fucking finale. The other major issue Drag Race has right now is with All-Stars winners specifically, because my god does it not know how to handle All-Stars anymore. Ginger Minj is very talented at a lot of things. Just ask Jennifer Aniston about it once she's done getting Ginger's coffee. But the show did just an atrocious job of painting her in a positive light or telling her story well. And the favoritism was so blatant that Mistress Isabel Brooks was calling it out during the brackets phase, like not even in the semifinals. Hell, Mistress was given a more justifiable winner's edit than Ginger for the time she was on the season. So was Georges, so was Bosco, so was Irene. And the favoritism was painfully obvious, which is all the more absurd when you recognize that Ginger is an insanely talented queen, in spite of, also being an insanely talented liar. Like, you don't really need to put a thumb on the scale for her. Yes, she went home early in All Stars 2 because that was maybe the most stacked competition they've ever had. But like, she did make it to the finals in season 7, not All Star 7. She didn't win, so she didn't get to go for that. But like, she was clearly a talented queen. She did well on All Star 6, which I kind of sometimes forget she was on. Like, they didn't need to do that, but doing it undermined the narrative of her as a decent winner. I mean, All Stars 11 just wrapped, and in spite of the fact that Crystal Method is one of the most popular, beloved, non-polarizing queens ever cast on that show, production fucked up her narrative so badly that the fandom was angry that Joey J didn't win because the producers gave Joey the winner's edit and Crystal got the Ginger Minj edit. And to be clear, Crystal did amazing. Anyone who says otherwise, argue with the wall. Even if you think it was rigged for her, she did still earn it. The problem is that if you're going to tell the story of Joey J, the dark horse, the wild card, the first gay person ever winning the show, it should end with Joey winning, right? Like, that's the story you told. Why is that not the conclusion you have? And I think if she had, it would have actually been very good for the show for reasons that we're going to get into in this section, as well as what we've done before and what we'll do after. But also, it's important to remember that Crystal is a very good and very deserving winner in her own right. That season just wrapped as I'm recording this. It wrapped after I finished writing this. Like, for context on how long this has taken, it's like a 25,000 word script. I've been writing this since like, mid-June, I think? Early June? Probably before that, realistically. It's taken a while. Anyways, this here is the problem. Drag Race does not trust its winners anymore. Not only will it avoid putting them in danger of elimination, God forbid a fucking winner have to lip sync for their life once in a while, but it'll try to coddle them and protect them in a way that they don't actually need, and which actively undermines their perceived ability. In fact, it's even worse than that, because by putting the other queens on the season through the gauntlet, it actually frequently accidentally makes the case for the other queens that they've fought harder for it than the planned winner. Again, Joey J is kind of a good example of this. It's like a grown adult's parents calling into their workplace to ask why they haven't gotten a raise yet. Like, it looks ridiculous. It reflects badly on them. And it's even worse because, just like in the analogy, let's assume that this grown adult doesn't know that their parents are doing this and certainly doesn't want them to be doing this. Like, that's kind of the position that a lot of Drag Race winners are being put into lately. And this isn't just bad because it undermines the perception that the show is actually trying to find America's Next Drag Superstar or whatever, but because it leads people to stop wanting to compete. Again, All Stars 8 famously saw frontrunner and fan favorite Heidi N Closet quit mid-season, and she was very open about the fact that she was doing it because her, Jimbo, and Candy knew in advance that the 3 of them were considered to be the favorites out of their cast, and that once production started to be more and more explicitly biased in favor of Jimbo, that it was never going to go to her. Jimbo didn't do terribly in All Stars 8, but the show was so desperate to justify its first US franchise winner who didn't start on a US franchise that it overinflated her performance by constantly putting her in the top. And that did her no favors because she was in the Roomocracy format, and she's a terrible lip syncer, so it made her look like she was actually just not very good and only advanced because of favoritism, not skill. Again, remember how I said earlier that Drag Race casts its seasons and plans its winners because it's trying to communicate something? Well, that is true, but it doesn't mean Drag Race is aiming for good targets or always taking good shots. Global All-Stars was so horrendously biased in favor of the queens on franchises RuPaul had judged that it was obvious from the jump that one of the 3 of them would win, and that realistically is gonna be Alyssa Edwards. She's an icon of the franchise, argue with the wall. And the other two Rue franchises had representatives who just didn't really compare to her. But because the judging was so bad, and RuPaul's open inability to treat anyone from any other country like a human being and not a kitschy novelty toy, it was a pretty unearned victory for a season that was supposed to be about finding the international all-star. Like, it should have gone to Nelenia. I'm so sorry, I can't say words apparently. But like, that would have been the best outcome. That would have shown that this is a franchise that's built for global all-stars, not just, having an international procession of queens leading up to an American winner once again. It was part of a trend as well. Out of all of the seasons of the show that included a cast made up of returnees from at least one international franchise, including the 3 UK versus the World seasons, the 2 Canada versus the World seasons, Drag Race Philippines Citations Royale, Global All-Stars, All-Stars 7, and All-Stars 8, only Citations Royale and UK versus the World 3 have crowned queens that were not previously judged in at least one season by RuPaul. And both of those only happened in like the last 12 months. There are also 2 more of these seasons going on right now. We have Drag Race Down Under versus the World going on, which, who knows, maybe Raven will win it. And we also have Canada's All-Stars, which, did include a queen from the Canada's or the American franchise who got eliminated first. So technically they're also going to fall into this category alongside Citations Royale and UK versus the World 3, but whatever. Moving along. One of the accusations that's always haunted All-Stars is that it just exists to give consolation crowns to queens Rue thinks were robbed or who would have been good for the show to have in its winners catalog. Infamously, a YouTube comment once said about Chad Michaels, winner of All-Stars 1, that Rue knew she was about to die and just wanted her to be happy. That's an accusation that's never really been provable false, given the nature of it, but for a long time the show did a good enough job justifying its outcomes that it wasn't really a super, legitimate critique, or at least it wasn't a super, obtrusive critique. However, it has become a harder allegation to dodge in recent years because it has just been kind of on some bullshit. Jimbo getting a crown felt like an IOU from UK versus the World 1. Ginger getting one felt like an IOU from her last 3 seasons, like it was a Lifetime Achievement Award. Angeria winning All-Stars 9 felt like they were trying to subvert that accusation by not giving it to Roxy, the obvious candidate for that and the one whose performance and edit backed up giving her the crown. But in trying to subvert the outrage, they just fucked over Angeria by giving her a win, but not editing it in a way that made it seem earned. And we've already talked about Ginger and Crystal, because who even knows what's going on anymore? And this does fuck over those queens. It hurts their perception in the fan base when the show doesn't justify its winners because now they're treated like they're industry plants or production favorites or just less talented winners who didn't deserve it. For Angeria, it led to a whole bunch of racism and accusations that she only won because she was black and the Hall of Fame wasn't very diverse, having only crowned 2 other black queens out of the prior 9 winners, and one of those being a shared win with a white queen. And with Ginger, it's led people to treat her like she's Serena Chacha and not a genuinely very talented performer. The presentation of Jimbo feels like it's led a lot of American fans to think less of the Canadian queens and Canadian franchises, especially after how poorly it treated Isis Couture on Canada versus the World 2, when, frankly, she should have been on all winners. But at this point, it's probably time to talk about the biggest problem with all of this. Or rather, the source of all these other problems.
The realness.
Part 7. The production. Okay, something important to establish up front before we get into this section is that every single competition on Earth exists on 2 axes: competition and entertainment. Some competitions aren't really produced for entertainment at all. Youth sports and chess aren't really built for entertainment of the audience, they're based on the competition itself. They can still be entertaining to watch, but that's not what they're being produced for. Others are basically exclusively entertainment with no real serious competition testing any sort of skills. Something like The Circle, with its random new contestants being added mid-season, is pretty entertaining. Depends on the season, I guess. But it's not like it's a competition in the most pure sense, right? Most competitions, particularly at the highest levels, exist somewhere between the two. Reality competition shows, especially for specialized skills, are an obvious example of this, and that can be a hard balance to strike. It's not a zero-sum game outright, but there are some very harsh trade-offs. The ones that tend to work out the best on both fronts are ones where the specialized skill itself is an entertainment-based one, especially if it's a pretty broad category of entertainment, which is why Drag Race works so well. However, this also applies to pro sports leagues and competitions like that. The Olympics is pretty heavily organized around who can put on the best show with the flashiest infrastructure and the best draw for tourists and guests and everything. Not just who's the best at hosting a competition. If that was a factor in any of this, we would host the Olympics in one place every time. There'd be one set of facilities that would be maintained and have international dues paid towards it or whatever. But instead, we do this big elaborate thing where everyone gets a shot. Well, not everyone, the very richest countries with a lot of resources do, but whatever. The season structures for the NHL, the NBA, the NFL, and MLB are all based around not just what's most convenient for players and teams, but also fans, and fan outcry can directly lead to rule changes that are more based around what fans want to see for entertainment purposes, rather than what might be purely best for the competition at the core of it all. Hell, where a team is based, or if a team even exists in a pro sports league, is based around the entertainment. Not competitive spirit or like what cities can offer the best players, right? Like, we don't have the Edmonton Oilers and the Calgary Flames and the Vancouver Canucks because Edmonton, Calgary, and Vancouver have enough local pro athletes to make it work and win some cups. Or, well, cups singular in the case of Calgary, nothing in the case of Vancouver, cups plural in the case of Edmonton. Sucks to suck for the southern half, I guess. I don't know. Anyways, you can tell by looking at something like the Overwatch League, which just transparently lifted this model for this exact reason, even though it made setting up their actual games a nightmare if they ever wanted to do them locally, which is why they mostly didn't and played them just like in LA. The reason I'm saying this is because a lot of people look at any competition that's incorporated into reality TV and assume it is all basically fake, that there is no competition. It's just straight up scripted or production manipulation. And like, no, reality TV competitions aren't scripted, mostly because these are real people whose lives are affected by this and it doesn't go well for a lot of them. Production definitely does have the capacity to manipulate shit though, and they have more of a chance to do so the more the competition skews towards competitor versus show as opposed to competitor versus competition or competitor versus contestant. You know, Survivor has a harder time at this than Drag Race because Jeff Probst isn't like really allowed to decide who's going to be vulnerable at tribal council or decide who's going to receive votes or who might have an advantage that plays out in their favor. Like, there's pretty limited options there. At most, they could try and like construct challenges in a way that would benefit a certain contestant, but even then it can be hard to predict because a lot of people who are good at challenges don't necessarily maintain that capacity as the show goes on. Survivor also doesn't really have that much of a stake in which of their contestants wins though compared to Drag Race. I mean, Survivor does have a stake in it because winners from different backgrounds or different playstyles reward and encourage different types of people to join, but part of what makes Survivor work is there's no real way to be good at Survivor that isn't being good at the show Survivor, if that makes sense. Like, okay, in order to win the Stanley Cup, you don't actually have to be the best hockey team. Shocking, I know. We talked about this a bit in the video about social skills and competitions a little while back, but it's very possible to win a championship in a sports league in spite of, on paper, objectively not being the best. Lots of teams with worse track records than their opponents make it farther in playoffs. I mean, it's kind of naturally what you'd expect to happen because most sports can turn on a dime. I mean, I remember watching Game 4 of the NBA Finals, and that shit was a perfect example of how the game is not over until it is over, because the Knicks pulled out of a nearly 30-point deficit in the fourth quarter to win it with literally less than 2 seconds left in the game off a tip-in shot. And keep in mind, even though the Knicks won the series, it wasn't a shutout. The Spurs did win Game 3. Objectively speaking, the NBA Finals prove that there is no universally objectively better team in that series. Like, there were conditions under which both teams could beat each other, and even when the conditions are as identical as possible, the outcomes can still change. For Survivor, the same sort of thing can happen, but in more of a bubble. In the same way that the Spurs were able to win Game 3, there are lots of times where the best player in a season of Survivor won't win for any number of reasons. Maybe there's a bitter jury, maybe they got a bad draw on a tribe swap that left them in the minority, maybe they gambled and lost on an immunity idol, etc. Survivor's a lot more unforgiving in this circumstance because it's one fuck up and you're done. That's part of the appeal of it as a competition. It is not truly a pure test of skill because there is some degree of randomness and a lack of control involved. And the test of being good at Survivor is basically a test of how well you can play the cards you're dealt. It's about adaptability. It's about survivability. You know, some people play bad hands really well and can come out on top. Think Denise Stapley, my sex therapist queen from Survivor Philippines. Some people play good hands poorly and still fuck it up. You know, think kind of Russell Hantz on Survivor Heroes vs. Villains, who just could not stop being a weird little freak for long enough to secure a win, even with the massive advantage of being an unknown quantity coming into the season, which meant no one knew what kind of player he was. And Survivor does sometimes introduce these sorts of mechanics similar to a best-of-7 tournament that allows players to come back from a single loss. You know, Redemption Island was a gimmick where every eliminated contestant would face off against each other in a challenge, with the winner eventually re-entering the main competition. Many would argue that this mechanic exists specifically to protect production favorites. I am many in this case. I don't know how many there are, but I am one of them. Ozzy Lush and Boston Rob were both returnees on the first 2 seasons with the gimmick, South Pacific and Redemption Island. And in both cases, it was clearly a gimmick that benefited them more than the rest of their cast, including their fellow returnees, Coach and Russell Hantz. I mean, Boston Rob didn't end up needing it, but like, that's why, or no, I think he didn't end up needing it. It's been a minute since I watched Redemption Island, but regardless, he was much better at challenges than his, you know, co-returnee, Russell Hantz. Same way Ozzy Lush was much better at it than fucking Coach. Drag Race, by contrast, is not produced like this. And that's for 2 key reasons. First, the drag is a skill that's basically purely subjective. And the goal in Survivor is just to find the sole survivor, a title that just reflects that you won Survivor and got $1 million US, or 600 and some thousand after taxes, whatever Jeff Kent said back in Philippines. But it doesn't really reflect anything beyond that. Like, it doesn't impart anything about your career or future prospects. America's Next Drag Superstar is a title that, given the prominence of Drag Race within its industry as well as within culture, does mean something. It is the show declaring that this person is the front runner of drag, the standard bearer for their, at least country, in some capacity. Does that mean they're literally the most important drag queen? Not really, no. But it is the show declaring what it perceives to be the most important drag queen who competed for that title and the most worthy of it. And that makes it a reflection of the show's quality, values, and principles. And if they get it wrong, it tarnishes the title's value for the audience and future contestants. If Serena Chacha is a title holder, that title loses value because she's associated with it. The fact that it is exclusive, hard to get, locked off to the very best of the best, makes it valuable. This is part of why Drag Race has such a hard time grappling with its winners who've fallen from grace, like Sharon Needles and Tyra Sanchez. Because, while their wins were important when they happened for different reasons, their existence as title holders is a blemish on the record for the show, even if it's not really the show's fault. This is also why, in spite of all reports that Sherry Pie absolutely dominated her season during filming, there was zero chance they were going to crown her once reports came out that she was abusing people and tricking them into doing steroids and other serious bodily harm for her own fetish. The second reason for this is that, given the hugely varied nature of drag as an art form and the subjectivity inherent to evaluating it, it is necessary to maintain some understanding of consistency. Namely, RuPaul's personal tastes, judgments, and values. When it's a comedy challenge, the mantra is literally make Ru laugh. Doesn't matter if nobody else fucks with you, matters if she fucks with you. She serves as a guardrail, because even if Serena Chacha holding the title of America's Next Drag Superstar would be a net negative for the show and the title, Serena Chacha doesn't give a fuck about that. She gives a fuck about being America's Next Drag Superstar. If you give her the power to choose who's going home, it's going to be your competition, not the weakest competitor. In a standard Drag Race season, the contestants have nothing to lose and everything to gain from fighting dirty because the audience at home aren't already emotionally invested in these queens. And so if the goal is to evaluate who do we think is the best drag queen, and not which drag queen can survive until the end, then production has to play a role in skewing things. Like, they're the referees. They hold things together. All Stars, as previously mentioned, is an example of how wrong this can go when you try to fuck with it. And I'm going to use Naomi Smalls as my case study here on both fronts. Naomi Smalls, in Season 8, was rightfully placed in the bottom two alongside Acid Betty for their poor Snatch Game performances. There were other queens who did poorly, notably Kim Chi, but production wanted to keep Kim, and since Kim would have been blown out of the fucking water by either of them, I think they put Naomi with Acid because they figured Acid would have to fight more to beat Naomi, but she could still do it. Then, Naomi pulled off an incredible upset. It was great to watch, wiped out Acid Betty, and proved herself to be a frontrunner. Proved that she should be taken more seriously than people were willing to give her credit for. Production was making choices with predictable outcomes the whole time. As soon as the challenge was over, they were able to decide which two queens performed the worst and which they were okay with losing. Losing Acid Betty would mean that Naomi got a story arc that would justify keeping her without killing the NYC Girls arc for Bob since Thorgy was still there. And while losing Naomi would just end an arc that, at the time wasn't really going anywhere and could have been lost without dragging the narrative down too hard. They knew that there were only 4 possible outcomes for the episode. Either Naomi wins, Acid wins, they both win, or they both lose. And realistically, given that they already had a double elimination and a returning queen this season, only the first 2 were on the table. Compare this to All Stars 4, which used the Lip Sync for Your Legacy format. Naomi, alongside Monet Exchange, were the top 2 queens for the Makeover Challenge, with Manila and Latrice in the bottom. Again, all deserved placements, and Drag Race doesn't want to put itself in the position of having to send home any of those 4 queens because then people yell at them for ending a fan favorite because they all were. But at this point, Drag Race lost control of the narrative, and this is a problem. Latrice, of the 2 bottom queens, deserved to be eliminated here. She performed worse than Manila in the competition. She'd already been eliminated once and brought back. And, if this were a regular season, the only way Manila would have gone home if she'd turned out a truly abysmal performance in a Lip Sync for Your Life. But this isn't a normal season, and Naomi Smalls, unlike a lot of All-Stars, is more focused on winning than just being perceived as playing fair. She picked Manila's lipstick. And what's more, Monet picked Manila's too, although I still hold to my belief that Monet threw that lip sync. Producers accidentally played themselves. Their frontrunner was now going home no matter what. Naomi delivered a top 10 lip sync that night and, by playing entirely within the rules, fucked up the game that the producers wanted, because I'm pretty sure they wanted Manila to win. This isn't even the first time this sort of thing has happened, although last time it happened in reverse. It actually had happened in both prior All-Stars. Season 2 saw Alaska and Detox eliminating more serious competitors under the guise of just saving their friend Roxy. All-Stars 3 saw Ben de la Creme self-eliminating halfway through the season, and the jury vindictively refusing to send Shangela through as a penalty for her success in the competition. However, this time Naomi made it explicitly clear what she was doing. And when the other queens pushed back and said, well, that's not the fair choice. Latrice should have gone home. Manila was playing better. Naomi, iconically, said, life's not fair. And that's bad. Bad. Naomi did play fair. That is, if fairness is defined as, quote, playing by the rules of the game, which I think most of us would accept is fair. But what wasn't fair was that a frontrunner was being sent home. If your definition of fair is a more holistic one where the fair decision is to eliminate who has performed the worst and or is least deserving of being entered into the Drag Race Hall of Fame, which is the title for winning All-Star seasons except for All-Star 7. The problem for Drag Race, and especially for All-Stars, is that the pitch to return to the show only really works if you're guaranteed some baseline level of fairness. For example, remember how earlier I said that there's sort of an unofficial 3 strikes you're out rule for being in the bottom? That isn't an official rule. And there's no real reason to abide by it either if our definition of fair is that first one that we described about playing by the rules of the game. In theory, just like how lots of people can only make it to the end of Survivor by being incredibly good at challenges even if they suck ass at the critical social game, and can win by playing that way, it should be allowed for a queen to lip sync her way to the crown. That would be fair within the rules of the game. But the show won't let you. It can't let you. Being in the bottom once is fine. Drag is a varied art form, and it's not expected that everyone's going to be good at everything. Being in the bottom twice is, well, certainly not ideal, but it might also just mean you fucked up 2 design challenges or whatever. Not a sign of being overall bad, especially if you're not in the bottom for stuff like Snatch Game, where it's pretty important. Just that you got tested twice on the same skill that you're bad at and fucked up. Or maybe it's not even that. Maybe by the end of the season, where the half dozen remaining contestants are all really, really good, there was just no room for the kind of error that would have left you still solidly safe earlier in the season. You can survive that. But 3 times? Well, now that's a sign that you failed a lot in the competition. And even if you are a solid lip syncer, and even though that's a huge part of what drag is, production typically puts a thumb on the scale to say, nah, America's Next Drag Superstar needs to be more than just a lip syncer. And outside of very rare edge cases, you are not surviving your 3rd lip sync. And yeah, it's kind of good that Drag Race can do that. It would be deeply unsatisfying if, for example, April Carrion had won season 6 of Drag Race. And I say that as someone who loves April Carrion. Do not get that twisted. April would have mopped the floor with just about everyone in her season in a lip sync, including probably all 3 finalists, or at least 2 of them. Trinity K. Bonet on that same season was a stunning lip syncer, one of the few who could have sent home April, and even then, Trinity eventually got sent home on her 3rd lip sync against Adore Delano in a lip sync that, I think he probably could have called either way. And Naomi saying that out loud, that life's not fair, was a bell that couldn't be unrung. The same way that Chi Chi DeVayne standing up for herself on the runway and pointing out that she was poor as shit and could barely afford to keep a roof over her head, and still more than held her own against much more well-off queens even if her looks weren't always on their level, was something that couldn't be undone. Once the unfairness of production is identified, called out, and acknowledged, you kind of can't help but see it everywhere. And what's more, once it's been called out, the refusal to change anything about it means that you're tacitly on board with it as production. And then, since production really can't stop it a lot of the time, we all just watch it get worse and worse. The point of all of this is that producing a competition isn't inherently bad or anti-competitive. But this is the biggest aspect of how Drag Race is killing itself as a competition. Bad production. Once upon a time, Drag Race trusted its winners to be able to earn it, to not really need to be carried with gentle hands to the finale. Prior to season 9, only 3 winners had never had to lip sync for their lives outside of the largely ceremonial final lip sync of the season: Tyra, Bianca, and Violet Chachki. Every other winner was in the bottom at least once, albeit usually in a lip sync that was biased in their favor, either because their opponent's track record, the song, or whatever else. If you go beyond winners and look at finalists overall, that list expands to include Nina Flowers, Chad Michaels, Alaska, Courtney Act, and Kim Chi. Over time, that's changed. The elimination of Valentina in season 9 spooked them, and they got more protective of their winners. And look, obviously your winners will usually do well and rarely perform so poorly that they belong in the bottom, especially more than once. But again, this is a varied art form, and most queens aren't good at everything. If a preferred winner has strengths and weaknesses, the production can accommodate that by building challenges for the season that they'll excel in and casting queens who aren't as strong in them in those challenges. Hell, even the order of challenges can matter a lot. If a queen just killed it in 3 straight comedy challenges and then fell short in a design challenge, her perception by both the fans and other competitors is perceived differently than if the design challenge had come first. But season 9 really solidified it though, both because of Valentina and because of Rose Petalgate. For the unfamiliar, and honestly I'd be kind of shocked if there's that many people who are watching this video and have gotten this far along and watch my channel who are unfamiliar with it, due to a severely lackluster set of lip syncs in season 9, the format of the finale was changed to a lip-sync SmackDown tournament at the last minute between the top 4. This was likely seen as a pretty safe bet for them since their preferred winner, Shea Coulee, was also a very strong lip-syncer. But then, by God, there's Sasha Velour in a red wig full of rose petals from the top rope, and it's maybe never been so fucking over for anyone. Like, it was brutal. Shea Coulee was genuinely fucked up for a while over it. Like, has talked about how the rose petals basically haunted her. Because as much as Sasha earned the win in that lip sync and ultimately earned winning that season, Shea probably should have won under that definition of fair that had been used up until that point. And Drag Race could excuse that one because Sasha's performance was just objectively one of the most iconic moments in not just Drag Race history, but reality television history for sure. But then in season 10, they did it again and it went badly. For one, Asia O'Hara had the infamous butterfly gate where she tried to incorporate live butterflies into her routine. It didn't work and it was not good. And also Aquaria, in spite of being the clear frontrunner and the obvious production favorite who deserved the win the most, kind of lost her lip sync to Eureka according to people who watched it live. But, Cameron had gone against Asia and gone to the finals. And then Eureka was going to be going up if she won that lip sync against Aquaria. That's kind of rough. They hadn't built a narrative for either of those queens to win. So they just gave Aquaria past the finals anyways. And then Aquaria did win that final lip sync. She did deserve her eventual crowning. And she deserved the crowning throughout. It's just that, this format sucks, kinda. Ever since then, the main series has tried to keep this format kinda because it was dramatic and iconic when, Sasha Velour did it once. But it's never really worked. And that's kind of why they've settled on this current format of giving everyone an original song, letting Rue pick her top 2 finalists, and then letting the top 2 lip sync for the crown. With All Stars, production basically gambled on the queens prioritizing long-term self-preservation over the short-term within the competition. They hoped that queens would play by that old definition of fair. And while they let it slide in All Stars 2 because the narrative worked out because they did want Alaska to win, and they let it slide in All Stars 3 because Ben quitting fucked it all up anyways and it wasn't really the format's fault, All Stars 4 made it clear it was not workable. They tried using this format for UK versus the world as well, and that was a fucking mistake that saw people fighting to win rather than trying to play fair, which, fun for the competition kind of, but not really fun for the premise of fair. Like, I don't think it's controversial to say that the person who won UK versus the world season 1, Blue Hydrangea, was not the strongest competitor on that season. Arguably, she's kind of around the middle of the pack, and I say that as someone who likes Blue Hydrangea, but like you had queens like, I would say Lemon, but also fucking literally a host of the show from Drag Race Thailand on that season who then got eliminated by Blue because she didn't want that competition there. And at that point, they just said, fuck it, I guess I don't give it to Blue. Queens had, up until this point, also had this sort of informal agreement with each other to eliminate someone who communicated that they weren't going to play fair, with Morgan McMichaels being the obvious example in All Stars 3 when she was eliminated. Right after, she said she'd send the strongest bitch home. UK versus the World 1 threw that shit in the garbage. Even though Queens stuck to that principle throughout most of the other All Stars formats, and when they didn't, like Mistress being shady in All Stars 10, which was iconic, and I loved it. People should be less mad at her about that. They should be mad at her for their stuff. They've found a way to punish them for it later by just sending them home. However, in UK versus the World 1, it became a runaway train. Pangina Heels, the frontrunner, aforementioned host of Drag Race Thailand, eliminated Jimbo from Canada's Drag Race, the other frontrunner. It was a good play strategically, right move to make, 100%. But not only did it go against that old idea of fair, also kind of low-key sent home Rue's favorite. Next episode, Blue Hydrangea sent Pangina home in one of the saddest Drag Race moments anyone's ever seen. Like, it's such a rough watch. Pangina is sobbing, like howling in misery as she leaves because she feels like she's let down her country. Like, it's a lot. Blue won that season, even though, again, probably should have either been Mohart or frankly even Bag of Chips. And this is the moment where I think that Drag Race as like an overall franchise truly got too scared to test its winners or change its plans. Jimbo got brought back for All Stars 8 and they never once put her ass up for elimination because even though she probably deserved it a few times, they knew she'd be sent home immediately. And instead they put her in the top constantly because they knew that she'd never have to send anyone home because she's an atrocious lip syncer. So all the eliminations she was part of would be Rumocracy eliminations. And it was bad. All Stars 7, the all winners season, fucked itself up at the end by clearly positioning Jinx Monsoon as the obvious choice to win, but then inexplicably deciding it would all come down to a lip sync smackdown when Jinx is known to not be a particularly good lip syncer. She's had a good lip sync, but not necessarily to a regular pop song. Like, they put her up against Monet Exchange to Swish Swish for the Crown, a Katy Perry song with a Nicki verse that Monet absolutely slaughtered Jinx in, to the extent that, reportedly, Jinx just stopped performing and just kind of watched during the Nicki Minaj break. but they were too scared to change their plans, so they just crowned Jinx anyways, which, again, I think was the right call. I think Jinx deserved it, but they've just tainted her win by putting it behind this lip sync for the crown. In season 17, Lexi Love fucking bombed the Snatch game. Like, objectively, she should have been in the bottom, and there's no good reason not to do it. But production wanted to keep her around, didn't want to risk her against Lana, so they decided actually she was so bad she was good, literally what they said, and put Lexi in the top. Lexi didn't go on to win that season, I think because by the time the finale was filmed, they decided that she wasn't going to be a good winner for them, and so they went with Anya, but even then they fucked up by making it a lip sync for the crown that Anya did kind of lose to Jules. Anya's track record was better, but Drag Race wants another Rose Petal Gate, so it keeps trying this format that invalidates its winners. And again, this is on top of the fact that it keeps building narratives that don't suit its winners. Like on Anya's season, I think you could argue that Susie too was given the winners at it. I don't even know if you could argue it. I think you could just state it. That's kind of the fact. Susie was set up to be the winner of that season. And like, Anya's win is fair. Susie 2 going home is fair. Kinda. I think she should have stayed, but whatever. But like, why is that the story you're telling? And this is what I mean. The show has just gotten really bad at storytelling over the years. The last few winners of all the American franchises have been given fucking atrocious storylines, and it's routinely neglected them because it doesn't know how to tell their stories. Look at All Stars 9, look at All Stars 10, look at All Stars 11, look at season 17, look at 18, look at Global All Stars. Like, I don't know if they fired their lead storyboarder or like, I don't know if Rue hates people now more than she did before. But Jesus Christ, it's bad. Part of reality television competitions is that they don't just have to literally be fair. There's an obligation to show how and why it's fair, to validate your work. Like, you do have to show your work about getting to the ending. Regular competitions don't tend to have to do this as much because that's what the season is for. That's what the entire competition, that's what all those hockey games or baseball games or whatever are for. But Drag Race only has like a dozen or so episodes to do this. So you have to show your work. The competition's outcomes are based on subjective decisions that are made by unaccountable producers, which we all know in advance. And failing to justify it, failing to show that work, delegitimizes the competition's actual competitiveness by demonstrating that not only is the system not purely fair, which, you know, broken record, we all knew that to begin with, but that the safeguards that are meant to exist to maintain competitive integrity are failing to demonstrate that they are working as expected. And frankly, they largely are working. Anya and Mikey Meeks were both solid winners, and Angeria and Ginger and Crystal all earned their wins too when you look at track record and performance throughout the season overall. But the production is so fucking horrendous that it actively delegitimizes the competition by either doing a bad job of telling the winner's story, like with Mikey, framing other queens as more deserving winners, like with Anya and Angeria and with Crystal, or just laying it on way too thick and playing favorites way too obviously, like with Ginger. Part 8. What do? Well, you don't have to stop watching Drag Race. It's a good show and it's good to support queer art, or at least queer art that doesn't use AI. Curse your boomer ass RuPaul for putting it in Stop That Train, because I did want to go see that movie, but I'm not fucking giving you ticket money for that. And then also trying to get your directors to lie about it. Like, stop trying to put it in Drag Race, stop putting it on the WoW fucking socials, or I will make it my mission to make sure that fracking is the only thing that comes up when someone Googles you. This also goes for the queens, by the way. Especially, you know, whether it's on social media, whether it's in their music, whatever. Fucking stop. Like, embarrassing, especially for Evie Oddly to be defending that, but whatever, we don't have time for that right now. It also doesn't mean that we have to wholesale discount the entire idea of Drag Race being a real valid competition, because its flaw isn't that it's not a competition, it's that it's undermining itself with poor choices that all loop back to production. Like, I don't think the competition itself is getting weaker. I think it's that the show is not doing a good job of telling the story of that production. I'm going to give you a little bit of a story. It's a little bit of a tangent. Honestly, I might get this one edited out. We'll see. But a while back, I did a Danganronpa simulation thing. It was like a fun thing where I put everyone into basically a randomizer. Like, there's a ton of these programs online that exist where you can put in a bunch of names and then have it sort of randomly generate outcomes. Like, who won the challenge, who did this, who did that. There's a Danganronpa one where it'll come up with murders, it'll come up with the killers, it'll do all this stuff for you. And then I did these streams where for each stream, I just put everyone through that simulation and then had to task myself with writing out a whole story around it to make that narrative make sense, to make the outcome make sense. You know, why did this person keep voting for this person? Why did this happen? And ultimately, that's what made those fun. It wasn't that it was just the simulation, it was the story told around it. And I know that's kind of a weird side tangent, but in a lot of ways, that's kind of what reality TV story producers are doing, is they're being presented with all this raw footage, all this film, all of this content over what's happened over weeks and weeks of this competition, hours and hours and hours of these poor homosexuals being locked in this basement at WoW Presents Plus. And like, they have to tell a story out of it. They have to take that raw information, who won, who lost, whatever, and tell a story. And like, that's where they're doing such a bad job, I think. And what we definitely do need to do right now is stop blaming the queens for that. None of them are in on any of this shit any more than any of us are, and it fucks with them too. Like, the ones who lose because they feel like the season was rigged against them, that feels like shit because they spent a lot of money and it felt like it wasn't in their control. And the ones who won, like, even though they won, they got the crown, they are forever going to be dogged by the, accusations that it wasn't fair. And I don't know about you, that feels like the kind of thing that would keep me up at night thinking like, damn, maybe the like most important thing I've ever won in my life, maybe it was rigged for me. Maybe I didn't deserve it. Why did I win this? Like, and that's not fair to them. They don't deserve that. Like, this show survives and thrives in large part because it is the singular gatekeeper for drag queens to enter the mainstream, which means it has a chokehold on everyone who relies on it. Imagine if the only way someone could go from singing at open mic nights to potentially being able to turn singing into a career was American Idol. Like, that's the only option you have. Or like, maybe they could go on X Factor the same way a drag artist can also go on Dragula, but even then, that is a show with a lot less power to pump up your career. Like, of course they rely on it. And any approach to this issue that involves cutting that lifeline rather than trying to fix it is one that is a non-starter. This is not out of any sort of diehard loyalty to RuPaul Charles. Ru is a human being, flawed like anyone else. And frankly, there is an increasingly strong argument to be made that she's not the right person to preside over the entire industry of drag the way she has for the last 20 years. Her politics are increasingly out of touch. Her wealth is making her increasingly incapable of understanding the economic realities that most of these queens are facing. And she keeps on demonstrating that the areas of her judging where she is the weakest are not things that she thinks she should have to work on. She has consistently doubled down on the belief that it is not her fault and that she should be above critique, whether it is effectively blacklisting Courtney Act when she unquestionably should have been the host for, Down Under, and also probably brought back for at least one All-Stars, if not two by this point, or effectively blacklisting not just Willem for her criticisms of WoW and Drag Race and RuPaul, but seemingly even Alaska due to their association, even though Alaska is one of their most, well-respected winners. Or how she and the show went out of their fucking way to trash Fifi O'Hara's reputation to the point that one of their most talented performers quit the entire profession because she got mad about favoritism on the show and wasn't keeping it quiet. She does not seem to grasp the gravity of the role that she has created for herself in this industry, much less within the broader queer community, and I don't think that she acts with the responsibility that she should. What's more, hosts in other countries, notably Brooklyn Heights in Canada and Nikki Doll in France, have managed to not only survive but thrive with their franchises, with both producing some global talent and having some absolutely killer seasons. Like, if we're going on track record, the best queen to ever compete on any franchise of Drag Race is from Drag Race France. Like, not from US, and that's probably for a reason, because they're not under Ru. And it's not even just that they've produced good winners or whatever. They've had some really good seasons. Canada's Drag Race, again, is, I think, the best English language franchise. And it is the only one that Ru has never had her fingers in. It is proof that the show can survive without Ru. And given that Ru's nearly 70, which is insane to think about, look at her. Good God. Props to her for that. The reality is that she can't be here forever. She does deserve to live her life and not just work herself into the grave. She should get to retire, to live her life and enjoy the spoils of the work she's done to advance queer art and queer artists, because she has done generational work on that front, and to deny that is to deny basic reality. She should get to relish in the knowledge that, in terms of net impact, her life has been an unequivocally positive one on all queer people. The amount of visibility that we've gotten from Drag Race, the amount of support we've gotten, culminating in, the first gay person ever, Joey J, getting to be on the show, that means something. She should get to rest and enjoy that. And it does go beyond just some sort of vague notion of putting gay people out in the public space. Drag Race's casts are not just gay people existing on television, because again, as we all know, that didn't start until Joey J, the first gay person. This show, aside from using this competition to showcase some genuinely incredible athleticism and creativity and innovation, uses itself to have some really, really tough conversations. There are people who've been on the show who lost loved ones to the Pulse nightclub shooting, who've talked about the tragedy that it was. Queens have talked about eating disorders, gender dysphoria, racial disenfranchisement and policing, class, education, multilingualism, immigration, intersectionality, and so much more. There have been long, in-depth conversations about contestants being HIV positive and the impact it has on their lives and the way that they live their lives with it, ranging from the tearful declaration by Angina all the way back in the first season, all the way up to Van Gogh, winner of Canada's Drag Race 6. Drag Race has used fashion as an art form to make some incredible statements about police brutality, about colonialism, about murdered and missing Indigenous women, about the erasures of different identities within culture once their output could be stolen and repurposed. and about the diversity of our identities. Many queens, especially now that Drag Race takes trans contestants openly, have come out as being trans women, non-binary, or gender fluid. There are frank conversations about race and television and media happening in a way you don't really see anywhere else. A perfect example being the Vixen's fight with Aquaria, where Aquaria pushed her buttons and got under her skin and aggravated her, and then started crying when she got pushed back against, while literally dressed as like a wounded angel/dove. And then the Vixen not only, laid her out there, but also laid out in explicit detail how, whether Aquaria knew it or not, she was weaponizing how black people are portrayed as aggressive and mean, even though objectively speaking, Aquaria did start it, and, the Vixen didn't do anything untoward or unfair or go too far. And that conversation's important. Like, seeing that on TV when I was like 19 or 20 or whatever made me not only realize what was happening, but how, in my time as a Survivor fan, I had probably unknowingly fallen for that same stuff before. And again, to be clear, RuPaul is responsible for not only one of the biggest queer media empires in history, but also one of the best competition formats ever devised, which is all the more impressive when you remember how unbelievably broad drag is as a field, and the difficulty involved with trying to make it make sense. And this is the thing. Drag Race is a show that can, and should, and must, frankly, do better by its queens. It's not that Ru doesn't deserve her flowers too, but Rome wasn't built in a day, nor was it just built by Romulus. These queens built this empire brick by brick. Thank God there were so many to spare after nobody used them to kill anyone at Stonewall. And they should be treated as such. The show can and should improve, especially in terms of reinvigorating the genuinely near-perfect competition format it's developed, but is currently squandering. But that's not the same as saying people need to stop watching or whatever. Drag Race shows the potential and the importance of competition as narrative, and narrative as competition in terms of culture, society, and shifting mindsets. This shit can go in both directions too. Just look at how the presence of Carter Hart, a man who definitely didn't participate in a brutal act of group sexual violence as a member of the infamous Hockey Canada 5 against an intoxicated woman, even though he was repeatedly caught transparently lying on the sand to cover for himself and his buddies, in the Stanley Cup Finals this year skewed how people perceive the competition. Look at how the NBA Finals and the win of the Knicks is tied to Mayor Zoran Mamdani in so much of pop politics conversation, and how he himself ties them to the narrative of his time in office as well as a bigger vision of the people of New York City. This competition's integrity, Drag Race's competition I mean, needs to be maintained because otherwise queens are disincentivized to compete, and that's what kills the show. And I don't want it to die. Like, at the time of writing this last section, I had just returned from my 10-year high school reunion, and I had a fascinating conversation with my old classmates about Drag Race. Like, there's a bunch of straight guys that had watched a lot of the show, not because they, love queer rep or just these like very progressive guys or because their girlfriends had made them watch it or whatever, but because they are competitive people. Like, they really care about competition and the format and the competition and the athleticism and the way it enables these queens to showcase the highest forms of an incredible art form that is difficult and unique and just so captivating, while also being these messy, iconic entertainers doesn't require you to know what poppers are in order to get hooked. And from there, they got exposed to so much more about us and our community. And they were always pretty nice guys. Like, especially with hindsight, I think I got pretty lucky with where I went to school and the people I went to school with. And I doubt that any of them would have become rabid homophobes without Drag Race. But there were a lot of moments during that reunion weekend where those guys pulled me aside and were like, hey, like, I know it's been forever and I don't know if it's that serious to you, but I've felt bad ever since high school about the idea that I had been homophobic, or that this homophobic thing that I had definitely done, like that you felt really bad about it, or that I just wasn't supportive the way I should have been or whatever. And I just want to apologize. And I don't know if the world without Drag Race's influence, both direct and indirect, is the world where those kind of conversations would have happened. And it gets that influence from its competition. This video has been about how competitions die competitive deaths, but Drag Race is not dead. It is still very fixable, provided you ignore the Drag Race subreddits. Don't ever listen to those people. They are out of their goddamn minds. This video has shown where and why cracks form in a competitive format when there are incentives that push for anti-competitive approaches to the competition because of, profit or ratings or whatever else. And I hope everyone watching this understands that Drag Race is not alone here. Athletic leagues have these issues too. Just look at literally anything FIFA has done basically ever. They held a soccer tournament in Qatar, for Christ's sake. And while people love their football and their World Cups, each subsequent tournament full of stupid, uncompetitive bullshit and transparently rampant corruption drags it down just a little bit more. Like, Donald Trump did a fucking boss call to get a red card revoked. It's ridiculous. Drag Race doesn't have the luxury of having a billion people worldwide who are ride or die for drag like they are for football, though. It sustains itself off of the undeniable entertainment of its competition, and while we as consumers can't do a ton to change some of these issues, I hope that Drag Race understands that short-term gain is not worth the long-term cost and reevaluates how it handles its competition to ensure that competitiveness is being centered. After all, that's where every iconic moment I've mentioned so far has come from at its core. The best moments are always the result of these people put through the gauntlet of RuPaul's boot camp for wayward homosexuals and also Maddie-morphoses fighting for their spot in the competition and for their future career. It's people reacting to the stress and the pressure and the tough competition the other contestants pose and fighting back. Like, go watch the show and run through the references I've been making in this video and you'll see context surrounding them all explaining how the competition brought them there. And what's more, you'll notice that in seasons with weaker competitions, there's usually fewer of those references because people just lose the spark because what's the point when there's no fight for the crown? Especially because it's not like a lack of competition doesn't change the reality that this show is make or break for these people's careers. By taking the real sense of competition out of the equation, it leads to despair and depression and misery as queens trudge to their eliminations knowing that it is this preordained outcome and they can't do anything to change it, and that it will inevitably fall on their shoulders to try and make sure their career can survive the impact of the season on it, make sure their mental health can survive the onslaught from the fandom. For everyone's sake, the fans, the queens, the producers, the broader queer community, it needs to be competitive. It needs to get more competitive, frankly. And Drag Race needs to understand that at its core, it is a competition and that is where it derives that ability to not just decide America's Next Drag Superstar, but present these tough conversations about the queer experience, bring more queer experiences into the mainstream, and make it unapologetically clear that we're here to stay. You'll notice that Drag Race rarely actually gets dragged into the mainstream culture war bullshit, even though it is a very mainstream award-winning show whose contestants go on to spread across pop culture more broadly. And part of why that's the case is because the foundation it's built for itself is so solid and so broad. And that broad mainstream audience it's attracted has grown too attached to the show and its contestants and the fundamental humanity of the people showcased as a group, even if not always as individuals, for it to be a successful target. Like, there's all the stories that exist out there about right-wingers working themselves up into a frenzy about drag queen story hour or whatever, or pointing to trans people being overly sexualized. But like, did you ever see them talking about Sasha Colby basically stripping to knock on wood during the finale of her season? Like, no, of course not. They tried it a little bit with Gottmik, like they tried to kind of make one of Gottmik's runways look like that. But even then, it didn't work. Even when there's been this pushback against stuff like drag queen story times, you rarely actually saw Drag Race itself getting invoked. It was almost always just random relative unknowns, and almost never a Rue girl, and never one of the very biggest Rue girls. In fact, when that sort of thing happened by accident, like a drag show got shut down that a Rue girl was supposed to be at, that tended to lead to that being walked back. Rue creates protection for a huge amount of queer artists to not only survive and thrive, but also to fight back. And in doing so, gives an entire community a class of defenders, provided at least that they manage to get that far without being trashed by either the show or its fans. I actually made a whole video, I think 2 years ago at this point, 2 years, I believe, about how drag queens get this advantage of jester's privilege, similar to kind of how VTubers do, where because of the absurdity of what they're doing, the over-the-top makeup, the campy outfits, they can sometimes speak truth to power in a way that a lot of other people can't. They get the audience in a way that others don't. And that's really powerful and really important. So in terms of what do, I think the answer is actually pretty straightforward. We need to remember that this is a reality show and to not let the edit skew your perceptions of these real people. We need to remember that the blame for production fuckery rests squarely with production and not these very talented performers who bring insane skill and talent to the show for your entertainment at immense personal cost. And to specifically remember both of those aspects when it comes time to criticize the show's format, structure, and outcomes. I don't care if you don't like Ginger Minj. Like, I personally am pretty neutral on her myself. But it's not her fault that she won All-Stars 10 any more than it's Alaska's fault she won All-Stars 2. And in terms of the bigger topic of how competitions die competitive deaths, it is worth remembering that regardless of the nature of the competition, these incentives and influences to mess with the formula will always kind of exist. The role of profit, the role of short-term growth, the role of fuck you got my own leadership that only worries about what's going to happen while they're in charge, and the role of executives insisting on appeasing an audience that doesn't realize they're begging for a pot of boiling water on the stove, are all played in any competition where it doubles as any sort of an entertainment product. And while we can't end capitalism overnight, tragic, I know, we can do our best to ensure that the loudest, most consistent, and most influential voices on the topic of our favorite competitions are cognizant of the influences that are swaying them, and actively recentering their critiques to ensure that the wrong lessons aren't being learned and the wrong incentives are not being chased and rewarded, to disincentivize those incentives as much as possible. And to remember that there are tangible, real changes that can be made to improve things. Like, the Golden Beaver is in play for Canada's All-Stars right out of the gate. It led to an immediately engaging competition. Failing to do so is how competitions die competitive deaths. And while Drag Race isn't there right now, the risk will persist until that fuck-ass production team starts learning how to behave properly. And that is where this one's gonna end. Thank you so much for watching. I am so sorry that it was so late, and especially sorry that it was as long as it is. If you'd like to see more though, including an upcoming video about how nobody knows what the word twink means, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss it. This was the Members' Choice video from April, and while I still have to catch up with the aforementioned twink video chosen in June, plus the realistic graphics one from May and the shoot and order one from July, time waits for no man, so the August poll is ongoing right now between these 4 topics. I've mentioned it a few times in posts and stuff, but September is going to be the last Members' Choice poll for a while, owing to being overwhelmed with work and school and kind of just everything. But if you want to have a say in these last couple votes, you can join the membership for $5 a month on YouTube or Patreon at the links below. Lastly, thank you very much to all my channel members, both now and from when this video was selected in April. At the $25 Elite membership tier, thank you to Adele, Robot Juice, Bingo Banga, and Blue Rider. The $10 Premium membership tier, thank you to Anja Tanar, Cavi Corbin, Corey Anders, NJD, Mooney, Trevor, and Mint Pancake. At the $5 channel membership tier, thank you to Cage the Orc, Fish Toast, Alex Stone, Destiny, Cadence, Marsh Alice, Crimson Cyclo, Catliver192, MV, The Only Enigma, Mariah, Corey, Meep Cube, Noisy Pitta, Harv, Eski Sebi, Deku_, Aman Dadley, Lala, Teo Tamara, Alinea, Caffeine Jelly, Aiden S, 1000 Dumplings, Nilos, Lily Hero, Mitzi Core, Bubble Boy, Shy Shy, Shine, Ox, Pralaya, Gallium Conch, Felix, Bulk, Biggest Tigus, Corpacocta, Garfield Kermit, Lily, AJ Moment, Propaganda, Patrick Wallace, Tebo, and Barodity. Whether you're a channel member, a subscriber, or just decided to click on this video out of curiosity, thank you very much for watching, and I hope I'll see you around again soon.